Good evening, everybody. It's 7 p.m. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of the Woking Borough Council on 8th of February. Very nice date. This meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room this evening, whilst some officers are attending this meeting in person and some will be connecting via Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. My name is Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Dubé, just in case I forgot my name, and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee consists of 9 elected borough councils who are supported by a variety of professional offices. This is a quasi-judicial committee with a formal set procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who are registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. No applicants, objectors, supporters are permitted to address the committee or ask questions to disrupt the meeting. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application through the consultation process. Please note there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you have to say rather than how long you speak, but above all, stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try and reach a decision. Decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with the recommendations by the presenting case officer. And finally, it's the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application presented before it using the current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alternatives to the applications, nor to consider whether they're a good idea, whether they're needed, whether they're too costly, or there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable uses of the land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking and the microphone is unmuted only when you're speaking. Are there any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies submitted from Councillor Wayne Smith.
Any items withdrawn or
minutes of the previous meeting?
Minutes of the previous meeting? Would somebody like to propose acceptance of a second? Okay. All those in favor? Oh. Any declarations of interest? David and Alan. Al.
Thank you, Chair. I must declare a personal interest in item 83. My daughter is a resident of Sandford Court. However, I can confirm that she hasn't responded to the consultation on this, and nor has she given me the benefit of her opinions. The first time for everything.
Alistair?
As last time, application 2234 Townhouse Bridge. I see that the group, the Watch group, are speaking again. The Woking Active Travel Community Hub, and it's not. There's no formal membership of it, but I do receive and contribute to their correspondence. But I have made no comment on this beyond telling them the procedures of this committee.
Stephen?
Thank you, Rochelle. Mine isn't really a declaration of interest. It's a declaration of no interest, but I think it's important that I remind colleagues that when we considered the application relating to land at Bridge Farm in December, I made it clear that I had objected to the inclusion of that site in the draft local plan, but that I approached the planning application, which I see as a completely fresh and different matter, with an open mind. I think I need to just repeat that now.
Any applications to be deferred or withdrawn? Is this better?
Thank you, Chair. Item number 84, application 222906 has been withdrawn from the agenda.
Would We're proposing hearing item 86 immediately after item 83, as both are presented by the same case officer. We also will have a break after item 82 of 10 minutes to make sure that for equality, diversity, and inclusion. First application is number 79, application 220663, land south of Old Bath Road, Sonning. And Andrew Chug is the officer.
Thank you, Chair. I will just share my screen. This is an outline application for 57 flats in 3 blocks that would provide over 60s accommodation. Construction would follow demolition of 3 existing dwellings on site. Access, layout, scale and appearance is to be considered. An identical application, 201833, was approved in 2021 and provided a policy compliant financial contribution towards affordable housing within the borough. The latest application has been accompanied by a financial viability assessment, which identifies that the proposal is now unable to support these contributions. The FVA, financial viability appraisal, has been independently assessed by the council's consultant valuer, Claire Jones of BPS Surveyors, who's here tonight to answer any questions on that particular matter. Officers agree that the scheme is currently not financially viable. However, a deferred payment mechanism has been agreed with the applicant to secure affordable housing payments should the viability of the scheme improve. The application was deferred at November's planning committee for further information relating to the financial viability of the scheme. The information was subsequently provided by the applicant in the form of a financial viability summary that was considered at December's meeting. However, the application was deferred again at December's planning committee to seek details of the exact nature of the deferred payment mechanism to secure those contributions should the viability of the scheme improve. The officers' report, as updated by the supplemental agenda to reflect some minor changes, now provides the exact wording of the deferred payment mechanism for members' consideration tonight. Hence, the only issue for consideration for members tonight is the deferred payment mechanism, given that other issues surrounding the application have been discussed at previous meetings. The deferred payment mechanism would require the developer to submit a late-stage viability review on the sale of the 38th unit. If the viability review forecasts excess profits over and above the developer's 13.5% for the whole scheme, the council would get 60% of all the excess profits as a financial contribution towards affordable housing in the borough. For clarity, the total affordable housing contribution reflects the policy compliant figure for this scheme of 1.6 million, and the initial affordable housing contribution is 100,000. This approach follows the London mayoral review, viability review, which is supported by its own supplementary planning guidance and has been used on other applications at Wokingham and other boroughs. It is seen as a robust and tried and tested method of reassessing the viability of the scheme over the lifetime of the development to ensure policy compliance and optimal public benefits through economic cycles. And that is in accordance with the National Planning Policy Guidance Note 9. Hence, the application is recommended for approval as outlined on page 25 of the main agenda.
Okay, Trevor Fisher for Sonning Parish Council.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Sonning Parish Council would like to start by reiterating its strong objection to this application. Whilst for some time now the debate has been about the viability of the project, the SPC maintains that this proposed development remains inappropriate to this unsustainable location. As we know, the previous application for this site was only approved with the inclusion of £1.6 million towards affordable housing in Wokingham Borough. By approving an application which seeks to provide a fraction of this contribution, send a regrettable message to developers to try this ploy in the future. The SPC looks forward to a timely policy change to prevent this loophole happening in future, which is a sentiment already expressed by some members of the Planning Committee. The SPC would, however, like to acknowledge the hard work carried out by the WBC Planning Department to determine the rather complex formula which will now be used to calculate the sum payable under the deferred payment mechanism. As far as we can establish, this will lead to a fair contribution from the developer towards affordable housing, assuming that accurate and honest figures are used. We'd also like to thank the planning officer for obtaining answers from the applicant to our several questions. This is much appreciated, even if these answers may seem somewhat implausible. We are told that the WBC planners view each planning application submitted to them as a standalone document. The SPC feels that this can lead to unintended consequences, and as such, a wider view should be taken. For instance, the applicant here will no longer be able to justify the sylvan view of a golf course in his advertising, as this is now likely to be replaced by the not so accessible view of a housing estate. This particular corner of Sonning, south of the A4 and east of Pound Lane, presently includes approximately 25 dwellings, mainly detached houses. The addition of 57 dwellings in 3 blocks of flats is very much out of proportion, especially when we consider that there may also be a further 54 dwellings on the golf course, a 70-bed care home, a further 13 dwellings or care home on another plot. This is overdevelopment on a massive scale of this small area, affecting not only the local residents, but the wider character and heritage of this historic parish. Sonning Parish Council once again has asked you to consider our points very carefully and to refuse this application, as well as to reflect on the wider impact of these numerous prospective developments in this quarter of Sonning. We are a very small community. Thank you very much for your time.
Michael?
Good evening. Good evening, Madam Chairman, the members of the Planning Committee. I reiterate what Trevor Fisher's just said. From previous meetings to do with this application, you know my views, the views of Sonning Parish Council, a local MP and residents. I would like to ask if by any chance this scheme is unprofitable, who decides this? Presumably the councillor's valuer. Just a thought for this committee. If the amended contribution of £100,000 minimum for affordable units had been made at the outset, this application would have been would have been refused, perhaps even confused. However, an amount of 1.6 million was put forward instead, which the developer later found unsustainable. I would say that this application must be turned down. It is the worst presented one I've ever seen. It's appalling. This application remains unviable, and if developers, I call on them to do the decent thing and withdraw this deeply unpopular application. Thank you.
Members? John?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you, you did say that the profit was 13.5%. It actually shows 17.5% in the papers. Is that correct? Or are you correct?
17.5%. Maybe I was misheard, but yeah, 17.5.
Okay, all right. So this is more or less what we asked for at the last planning meeting. Yes, I see you refer to it as a ploy. It's not a ploy, it's a legitimate part of the planning regulations, and unfortunately I don't like, but there you are, we're stuck with it, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I've said previously, and I know other councillors have said as well, to maintain an argument that you can't make money building in Sonning, which must be one of the most expensive parts of the country, is risible. And clearly a case has been made, and one can only congratulate the accountants involved. We have pursued this matter. I think we've got answers to the questions that we have, and clearly the council officers are hemmed in by government policy. And for those who, like me, who think this policy needs to be changed, I'd urge you all to respond to the current consultation by the government on the National Planning Policy Framework, because only by doing that sort of thing will we get this sort of outrageous case removed for the future. But as things stand, I think we now have to accept we've run our road on this and may have to accept it.
Stephen?
Thank you, Rochelle. Much of what I want to say has been said already. We are in the position where I think we've taken this, unfortunately, as far as we can go. We have a deferred mechanism for payment, which seems as though it's the best we're going to be able to get. I think that the principle of development that Michael refers to has already been, I'm afraid, established by the previous application. We cannot go over that again. We are obliged to try and see what we can do with this question of the contribution to affordable housing. I think we've got as far as we can on that. There are certainly now, I think, no longer any sustainable grounds for refusal. So on that basis, I think we have no choice but to support the officer recommendation.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to seek clarification on 2 points, if I may. The first, I think, has possibly already been referred to this evening. It's a reference in the supplementary agenda, the first paragraph at the top of page 2, that the deferred payment mechanism will be used to calculate affordable housing up to the total affordable housing contribution. So could we please have confirmation that this is the 1.6 million figure agreed towards affordable housing in the previously approved application? So it would be up to 1.6 million.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. My second question is really stimulated by Councillor Firmage's comment, one of his comments. What is the process by which any disputes that might arise, in settling any disputes that might arise during the calculations, and how will this any disputes be resolved?
The developer will be required to put the review in, and again, we will have that assessed by our consultant valuers. We consider that the work done thus far on that, we've largely come to an agreement in terms of the viability on this site. So that will be scrutinised at that point.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any other speakers?
Any other speakers?
Well, could I just clarify? I mean, each planning application is taken on its own merits. I mean, the previous planning application was a package. I mean, the fact that the development was allowed then with the contribution to affordable housing, surely that is a package. This is a new package. You shouldn't be able to bring forward little bits that you like from the previous package. I mean, it was a package as a whole. Could you perhaps, this should be accepted or refused on its own merits, not referring to what was previously allowed? Could you just perhaps clarify that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Each application to be assessed on its merits at that particular point in time. Planning policy has moved on since the last planning application was considered. Not just planning policy, but the planning material considerations for this site. The council no longer has a 5-year housing land supply, so the balance is certainly different in terms of how this is approached. The scheme would deliver 57 flats on the site, and that has a greater balance now than the last application. Overall, everything balanced. The application is considered to be acceptable without the affordable housing, but largely because we've gone through that independent viability review. We're quite confident that it is clear that the scheme cannot support the affordable housing contributions. I would draw members to the second to last paragraph on the update report, And if I can just kind of refer it out, and it might kind of highlight the reasons of the kind of viability, the approach that, where we are. And that is, to summarise, on viability issues, the proposal as currently reviewed is deficient largely due to the existing use and structures on site, which result in a relatively high site value. So you've got 3 properties there which have a high value. This reduces the excess profit available for which the developer can contribute to affordable housing. A deferred payment mechanism will allow the viability to be monitored over the lifetime of the development and ensure a maximum viable contribution is made. So in answer to your question initially, yes, we're kind of slightly moved on from the last application, but on balance, the application's acceptable. That's the officer's view.
David?
Yeah, Andrew, can I just follow on from Al's question? So putting aside the tilted balance and so on, and let's assume we were back in the happy days where that wasn't an issue for us. If an application comes before us that carries a very generous allocation towards social housing, perhaps an unreasonably generous allocation towards social housing that tips our decision making and we approve it, and then 6 months later, another application identical but with no contribution to social housing comes forward, we've already then granted the basis of permission, as you state here, but we can't decouple the sudden withdrawal of SIL. What we're actually creating is a precedent here for some people to make almost completely fallacious planning applications on financial grounds that they know are not deliverable.
No, I don't think we'd be setting a precedent at all on this, really. As I said, we have to assess the merits of the application as it stands at that particular point in time. Also, the economics now compared to when the previous application was considered completely different, which is why, regardless of whether this is in settlement or out settlement, viability, if the viability comes to us and we agree that it's not viable, that is a significant material consideration we have to take on board, whether affordable housing is provided or not. Yeah.
Okay, can I just come back on that? That isn't quite an answer to the question I put. And the question I put was to say, if all other things being equal, so there are no other changes, just that the applicant suddenly decides that he can't afford the level of contribution to social housing that he previously had offered, we then still have no choice but to accept the financial viability case.
But that's not the position we're in. We don't have it's not a carbon copy of where we were. The economics have changed, and that's significantly moved on. Our housing land supply position has changed. You've got 2 significant material considerations there, which have shifted since the last application. So it certainly doesn't raise a precedent. You don't. In planning terms, you assess each application at that point in time, and things move on. We're in a different world now compared to 2021, I think, when the last application was granted.
Stephen?
Thanks. I think this is a partial contribution to the discussion we just heard. There are 2 aspects to this application. There's the built form and there's the developer contribution affordable housing. The built form part of it, the precedent is completely established because there was a previous application. This application differs from it very little. If we were to refuse this application, the applicant would go to appeal and almost certainly win, because the built form is so close to the previous built form as to really be very difficult to sustain a refusal on the basis of the built form. So the only issue of contention is the affordable housing contribution. Now, I think all of us find it very difficult to accept that the developer could not provide that affordable housing contribution. But we have secured, through this committee's efforts and the efforts of our officers and the cooperation of the applicant, a deferred mechanism for payment, which will mean that we will, as this becomes a profitable scheme, which it no doubt will in due course, secure the money we need for the affordable housing. So I think we should try to not look at this as a blueprint for the way applicants may in the future deal with this, because we have secured a method of getting the deferred payment. So I think now we should actually just accept that this is, I'm afraid, the best we're going to get.
Anyone else? John?
One point, I think I made it clear last time how much I don't like this, but the fact that we are getting 60% of the uplift could set a precedent which is positive for the borough, which is in the favour of the borough. I'm not specifically saying that this is a good thing, this application, but I'm saying getting this uplift that the officer's done here is really good news for the borough, because if it happens again in future, we'll be able to cite this case.
John, would you like to make a proposal for the committee?
Proposal is that, that unfortunately with the agreement here that the planning application is approved in its current format.
Thank you, Stephen. Those in favour? Was unanimous? The next item is item 80, land to the rear of 6 Johnson Drive, Finch Hampstead. Okay. Andrew Chugg is the officer again.
Thank you, Chair. Item 80, 6 Johnson Drive. The subject application seeks to demolish 2 warehouse buildings and erect 5 times 5 bedroom dwellings with associated parking and access roads. The application was considered at the January Planning Committee, where it was resolved that the application be deferred to allow time for additional consultation to be undertaken with residents. The application was reconsulted to 70 neighbours, including all commentators, as well as the existing neighbours, between 12th and 26th of January 2023. No further submissions were received. Accordingly, the officer's report tabled to the Planning Committee on 11th of July, attached as Appendix 2, remains unchanged, with the exceptions outlined in the new February report.
Patrick Bancroft is the next speaker.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. I'm Patrick Bancroft, Chartered Surveyor, Managing Director of Bancroft Developments, who've lodged this application. We've been building houses locally for over 30 years. When the committee suggested deferring the application in January, your Chief Officer, Brian Conlon, said he thought the application would be brought back before you again with the same report and the same officer's recommendation for approval. Here we are. There are no further objections. All we've had is a costly delay. The application still has a 10-metre wildlife corridor around the edge, protecting boundary trees and the privacy of adjoining residents. The ending of the brownfield uses on site will reduce traffic movements from Johnson Drive. This application is very different to the application refused at the last appeal. Your officers stressed to you that the tilted balance argument is now in favour of this application. In other words, the benefits of the application outweigh the arguments that were against the previous application. The previous application was for 25 houses, and the inspector concluded this was out of character with the surrounding area. Now you have before you an application for 5 houses entirely in character with the surrounding houses in Johnson Drive and Tomlinson Drive. The inspector concluded that the site was not sustainable as it was approximately 1,000 metres from California Crossroads shops, not the desired 800-metre distance. In other words, a marginal decision at best. It is, of course, much the same distance to those shops for the existing residents of Johnson Drive and Tomlinson Drive, and both these schemes were approved by this council. Wokingham Council has acknowledged it has a 5-year housing land shortage, and despite the comments made at the last meeting, this site will make a meaningful contribution to that shortage. Windfall sites such as this add up to significant numbers. Hopefully, the committee will follow their officers' advice to approve the application, and we're not put in the unfortunate position of having to take this application through the appeal process with all of the significant costs that would entail. If an appeal is necessary, I ask you to consider how the council will defend a refusal decision in light of the officer's report and the undoubted change in the tilted balance argument. Thank you very much.
Charles Marquette. You're on Teams.
I am on Teams. Thank you, Chair. This site is in the countryside and outside the settlement boundary in the 2010 local plan and the 2022 draft local plan. It's not in the Finchhampstead neighbourhood development plan, which is now past the Reg 16 public consultation and should carry increasing weight. Officers have suggested to you, committee, that this should be approved due to the tilted balance. As has been commented at the 2018 appeal, the inspector was very clear that this site was unsustainable. He said that allowing a development on this site would encourage car use as it was too far in terms of walking or cycling from local facilities and there is minimal public transport. Officers argue the site is needed to boost housing supply. However, I'd strongly contest with what you just heard that adding 5 houses basically would make any meaningful difference to Wokingham's housing numbers. That's clearly not true. So we have a site here which does not comply with any of our planning policies, and the planning inspector has called unsustainable, which is being recommended for approval. I wanted to talk briefly about the process. At the last planning committee, I raised concerns on behalf of residents over consultation. Officers advised me they'd written to over 50 residents. They've advised tonight they've written to over 70 residents and had confirmed that to me in a separate discussion. However, of the 32 residents I'm in contact with, not one of them has received a letter. I'm fairly certain that residents know about this because it has been in the local press. However, so something has gone seriously wrong with the process. Residents deplore the behaviour of this applicant and the blight he's placed on their lives over the last 20 years. But they're realistic about the fact the Wokingham Borough Council local plan is on hold. They've decided with great reluctance they won't oppose the application. I'd like to thank the officers for agreeing to meet a group of residents with me basically a few weeks ago to discuss the long list of planning conditions enclosed. I'd ask that the planning committee supports this list in full. My residents expect that the planning conditions will be enforced in full if the applicant deviates from them. Residents will be watching to ensure the applicant follows the agreement and will expect WBC to act in force against any deviance. From past behaviour, it's highly likely that will be necessary. So, Madam Chair, that's basically all I had to say on the matter. You know, I don't think any of my residents are happy about this situation, far from it. They've spent 20 years fighting against this site, but they're realistic about where they are now, and that's their opinion on the matter.
Members? David?
Thank you, Chair. I support what Charles Marquette has just been saying. I particularly support his view with regard to the Finchhampstead neighbourhood plan. And I note in the minutes from the meeting that the view expressed at the last meeting that the plan carried moderate weight was subsequently changed to limited weight. That is not the view of the other neighbouring councils. I know particularly Hart District Council on this. And if that view is continued by the council here, the group producing the Finchhampstead plan may well seek independent advice on this going forwards. I'm also not deeply appreciative of the letter that I received from the applicant, as I think other councillors may have done as well, which I consider to have a slightly sort of a threatening endpoint. That is not the way to pursue the public interest in these sort of discussions. But nonetheless, I also note the point that Charles just made with reference to local residents. And if that is the view of the local residents, then I will withdraw my objection to it as well.
Rebecca?
Again, without sounding repetitive, I'd like to echo Councillor Margetts's comments and Councillor Cornish's here. And a little bit for me about the tone of the applicant this evening and the way in which he addressed us as a committee. Everybody's aware that we want to work forward with this. We understand what the limitations are. We all fully well know as a committee what our 5-year land supply is. To be reminded by the applicant here of the situation the council is in this evening as a leverage over us, I don't feel is hugely appreciated. So we regrettably know what the outcome will be moving forward, and actually for the benefit of the residents that live in this area that have been blighted by this particular applicant for the last 20 years, this is a favourable outcome. And I again implore that we actually do move forward in monitoring what this applicant does, because we do have a fear that the actual terms and conditions of this application will not be adhered to. So it's quite uncommon that all of us will say exactly the same thing, and I think in a roundabout way we are. I would implore that moving forward, that I know this isn't a reason to object to it, but that this is closely monitored moving forward. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I mean, the plan application as it stands is, it's obviously it's been accepted by residents and also the ward members. I would just like to ask the officer, bearing in mind the extent of our 5-year land supply currently, do you believe 5 houses is actually of some interest to any inspector? Do you believe if 5 houses would be something? I have heard comments from inspectors in the past that they've allowed development, and the reason they've allowed development because the number of houses is so small, it has no impact.
Yeah, I think again, similar to the last case, it depends on where we are at that particular point in time. So if you have a marginal issue with 5-year supply, then maybe a small number of housing proposed in the development might not be given that much weight. However, if you're significantly below the 5-year supply, then obviously the weight given to just 5 houses would be significant. Yeah.
Answer where we are today, whether or not it would be significant in your view?
Yes, I believe it would be.
Chris?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Charles McGett's referred to the Finchhamstead neighbourhood plan as status changed, I believe. Is that correct? And has the officer taken that into account when determining the balance?
Thank you, Councillor. The weight of the neighbourhood plan has not changed since we last debated the item. There was an inaccuracy in what the officer reported, I believe, in the original committee report, where it was reported as having moderate weight, whereas it currently has little weight, and that was just a slip of the typing. But that nothing has changed, and we did seek clarification of that prior to the last meeting, where it was reported and clarified in the supplementary update. So nothing has changed since then. The status of the neighbourhood plan has not changed.
Any other members? Would anyone like to make a proposal on this application? Chris?
I propose to approve the application.
Is there a second? Okay. Now we go to a vote. All those in favor? It's unanimous. The application is approved. The next application is the land at Bridge Farm, Twyford. Application number 212720, and Sophie is the case officer.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Can I just check that you can see that?
Yes.
Thank you. This proposal is a hybrid application. It seeks outline planning permission for up to 200 dwellings on the site, with full planning permission sought for access into the site. All other matters relating to the detailed appearance, landscaping, layout and scale.
Sorry, the application you have there is for the wrong application. The information you're.
Beg your pardon. I think I must be sharing something else. Bear with me. Sorry. It seems I might be done. Sorry. Not too sure how that's happened. Sorry about that. Right, sorry about that. Try again. Can I just check that you could see that?
Yes, I can. It's the
Okay.
right application.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I won't repeat the description of the development. So on to slide 2. The application was brought before Planning Committee in December, but just to recap, the site is located to the northwest of Twyford and extends to an area of approximately 12.2 hectares. To the east of the site is the Henley Branch railway line, whilst to the west is the River Loddon. The A4 New Bath Road lies to the north of the site, and beyond the southern boundary of the site are 2 dwellings and a children's nursery. The above slide shows the location of the site in the context of the existing settlement boundaries. As can be seen, the site adjoins but is not within the existing major development location of Twyford and is therefore in the countryside. However, the site is not located within the Greenbelt or a conservation area. The site is proposed for allocation as part of the local plan update, but at present the status of the site remains unallocated. As mentioned, the application was brought before the Planning Committee in December 2022 with a recommendation for approval. However, the application was deferred in order for further information and clarification to be provided around the matters listed above and as referred to in the update report. The first reason for deferral was around the request for further consideration regarding pedestrian access to the Piggott School. The applicant has provided an updated access plan, which would increase the proposed pedestrian cycle path on the south side of the A4 to 4 metres, along with the width of the proposed Toucan crossing. Increasing the width of the pedestrian cycle path on the north side of the A4 to 4 metres is constrained by existing vegetation and an embankment, but notwithstanding this, due to the anticipated pedestrian and cycle flows along this route, the current 3 metre width is considered acceptable in line with LTN 120. The A4 PED cycle path narrows over the railway bridge to accommodate the safety barriers which are in place to prevent accidental vehicle loading on the footway. As such, the applicant proposes to install a dropped curb with a white lined 2 metre section of cycleway being provided on the carriageway to enable cyclists to join should they choose to. Appropriate signage in conjunction with this would also be provided at this point. This proposal is considered acceptable and also in line with LTN 120 guidance. At points beyond this, where the PED cycle path is less than 3 metres, the applicant proposes to widen this where possible up to the entrance point of the Big Plant Nursery located off the Walgrave Road. Here, pupils are able to access the school via an alternative path which runs parallel to the road. These proposals, whilst indicative, are considered acceptable and an improvement over the existing situation. Such improvements would be further detailed as part of the conditioned walking and cycling strategy and implemented through appropriate highways agreements. The above slide shows the access road at the southern end of the site, and full details of how this would be laid out will come forward as part of the reserved matters proposals. However, as this was included as a matter for deferral, the applicant has provided the above indicative plan to illustrate what alterations could be made along this route to manage the pedestrians, cyclists and traffic associated with the children's nursery. This would include providing a separate footpath and widening the carriageway where possible, along with the provision of appropriate signage. The proposals are considered acceptable in principle and, as mentioned, would come forward in further detail as part of the reserved matters conditions submissions. The accompanying update report provides responses in relation to the other deferred matters around school place projections, traffic modelling along the A4, the air quality contribution, and lastly, in relation to how the applicant could achieve zero carbon homes. In this regard, it is worth noting that the applicant has confirmed that they can commit to building the homes to future home standards, which goes beyond existing policy requirements and would mean a 75 to 80% reduction in carbon emissions when compared with the current building regulations. This means the dwellings will be zero carbon ready as the electricity grid decarbonises. This is therefore welcomed and should be weighed positively in the overall planning balance. In summary, it is considered that the matters around the reasons for deferral have satisfactorily been addressed. As stated in the original report to committee, the proposals are considered to represent a sustainable development located adjacent to the major development location of Twyford. Whilst WBC's lack of a 5-year housing land supply is due to past over-delivery rather than under-delivery, the tilted balance of the MPPF is nonetheless engaged, and there are not considered to be any identified adverse impacts associated with the proposals that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of bringing forward this site to contribute towards the Council's housing delivery targets. Bringing forward development on sites which are considered to be sustainably located, as the case is here, will help the Council's position in relation to resisting speculative applications on less sustainable sites. Officers are therefore recommending the application for approval, subject to the conditions listed and the completion of an accompanying Section 106 agreement. I would like to draw your attention to the supplementary planning agenda, which includes a minor correction, as well as reference to a further objection received after the publication of the report. In that respect, I'd like to clarify the point raised around the Pilkington principle in respect of an application on land to the north of the A4, which shows a proposed access arrangement which conflicts with that proposed on this application. The Pilkington principle concerned 2 applications, both of which had permission but could not be implemented. This is not considered relevant to this application, as the proposals on land to the north of the A4 are still under consideration and do not have the benefit of planning permission. Therefore, should this application be approved, it would not prejudice the implementation of any extant planning permissions. Thank you.
Bridget Ditchin from Twyford Parish Council.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Get the right way up. Whilst Twyford Parish Council notes the changes to the application, we still have objections. We understand that although the committee is unable to consider the emerging local plan and Twyford's emerging neighbourhood plan, they do contain policies which we consider worthy, and these would not be supported by this application. The application makes mention of 40% affordable housing. We're disappointed that there's no mention of working with a housing association. We realise that the actual housing mix is a reserved matter, but there is a serious need to redress the imbalance of housing in Twyford to conform to our first homes policy. Twyford needs expanded facilities to meet the present and future needs of our residents and those of our surrounding areas. There's a serious cause for concern that although the Pigott Academy can provide for the present needs of our young people, an expanded population in the north would seriously restrict the availability of places for pupils in the south of Twyford. The proposed roundabout at the north of the development will cause congestion at peak times. This will result in safety concerns on what should be a safer route to school and also additional air quality concerns. Traffic which at present uses this route may prefer to use an east-west route through the village to avoid this congestion. This conflicts with our plans to regenerate the village centre, creating a more pedestrian-friendly environment. We note the amendments to the access route to the south of the proposed development, which will aid pedestrian and cyclists. However, this does not alter the difficulty that pedestrians and cyclists will experience once they've exited this onto the south of the Wargrave Road, where the pavements are narrow and the sight lines are difficult. Although the proposed crossing on the A4 is an enormous improvement, it's not an adequate solution for the safety of students at peak traffic times. We'd also urge the committee to take note of the residents' comprehensive comments regarding flooding and mineral deposits on the site, which we believe to be factual. We believe that more work needs to be done by the developers to establish the impact on and near the changing floodplain. There are no targets for rewilding areas, no targets for improving basic infrastructure.
Could you please
in particular,
summarize yourself really quickly? Please. Yeah, thank you. The next person, Lillian Pearson Bishop, and the PowerPoint presentation by
Sophie will have the PowerPoint presentation.
Sophie. You have
Yep.
the PowerPoint presentation.
I shall try and share the correct one this time.
Okay.
Does that come up?
Please turn your mic on.
With 200 new houses, 400 plus cars, and 800 people, the Bridge End Farm site is not safe to be built on, and all of the villages around it will be impacted. There's no doubt about this. And those are the reasons why. Now, why am I saying this? Well, firstly, the traffic modelling suggests that the A4321 roundabout will have spare capacity over the next future years. Now, just see this roundabout on the 2nd of February when the children are being delivered to the school. Next slide, please. Next slide. See here the backup from traffic from Twyford at the same time. Also see the children on foot who are inhaling the traffic fumes. Surely 40 plus more, 400 plus cars are going to add to all of these problems, which not just in the morning, it's also in the afternoon. Now, frankly, more congestion means more accidents because drivers get frustrated and they take risks. Please remember the young boy whose jaw was broken by a large wing mirror. Also remember that in the 10-year period, there have been over 250 road accidents between Charville and Hare Hatch, and the majority of those have been on the A4. Also remember that more vehicle fumes causes more asthma and respiratory problems. And where are the GPs going to be to deal with these cases? Air quality management requires that any development does not result in emissions, extra emissions of pollution. This is definitely going to include extra emissions. The drainage strategy is to do nothing. And what I mean by that is it suggests that it relies on the leaking of extra water naturally through the ground, forgetting that there will be a lot of water drain off and that certain parts of this site have a very high water table, particularly the part by the River Loddon.
Can you please sum up?
Indeed, I will. Indeed, I will. There are very many different reasons for this site not being accepted, and therefore I would ask you to refuse it.
Chris Roberts. Chris Roberts, the agent.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just explain, I'm joined tonight by the applicant's transport consultant, so I'll be speaking, but if you did have any transport related questions, then we'd be happy to assist with that. Thank you, Chairman. As noted by the case officer, when the committee met in December, members raised several detailed queries regarding the proposals and identified that further information was required. The committee paper sets out how each reason, in the opinion of the officers, each reason for deferral has been addressed, and Crowdace also provided members with an informal update letter that explained this from the applicant's perspective. What I would hope this highlights is that Crowdace has continued to collaborate with the council and worked in a productive and positive manner. Precisely because we've engaged constructively with your officers, significant betterments to the scheme have now been achieved since the proposals before you in December. We will now widen both existing and proposed pedestrian and cycle infrastructure along the A4 in accordance with LTN 120, taking account of existing constraints. We have designed a solution to address the pinch point on the bridge, and this represents an improvement compared to the current situation. It is achievable without structural implications for the bridge. This has been endorsed by the Highways Officer as a sensible approach. We have proposed a range of footpath signage and speed control improvements along the southern Walgrave Road pedestrian access into the site, and again this is supported by the Highways Officer. In terms of environmental sustainability, all of the new homes will now be built to the Future Homes standard. This is a much improved offer, which accords with the interim position statement adopted by the Council in December. To put this in context, these would be the most sustainable homes that Crowdace have ever built. Likewise, through discussions with the officers, we have confirmed that the Section 106 contribution of £20,000 could be used to cover the cost of air quality monitoring in Twyford. At the Council's discretion, the monies could also support other initiatives such as anti-idling campaigns to help address the air quality issue. In addition to the above, we have also provided further details regarding traffic flows. This information confirms that all assessed junctions on the A4, Walgrave Road and the Twyford Crossroads will continue to operate within capacity. So this analysis is based on the Council's own strategic transport model. So it's the baseline data that your officers have given us and has been endorsed by the Highways Officer. Likewise, your officers have also provided information regarding the Pigott School, which indicates that development is unlikely to deprive places from existing children in the catchment. I would just add that the betterments described this evening are in addition to the other benefits highlighted in December. These include an approximate 30% net gain, biodiversity net gain, the planting of around 350 trees, a new riverside park, a full mixture of homes of different sizes and 40% affordable housing. The Housing Association will be on your approved list. Overall, we consider this to be a very good scheme. It's in a sustainable and walkable location and on a site that is proposed for allocation. And I think that's reflected in the officer's strong recommendation for approval. As I mentioned, I'd be very happy and my transport consultant would be very happy to discuss if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Sophie for a very full report. She's worked very hard on this application over a long period of time, and I'm grateful for her sharing her thinking with me. What I'm going to say this evening won't necessarily entirely delight her, but I'm trying to tread a careful line where I respect her judgment, but differ from it. And I think it is possible to do that in certain areas, which I'll come on to. Sadly, it's not possible to do it in some areas where I continue to have major concerns. Many of those concerns have been very eloquently expressed by Mrs. Pearson Bishop and by Bridget Ditcham for the Parish Council. And this is, as you will have gathered by now from the audience participation, an application that has excited a great deal of local opposition. Over 200 comments were submitted, well over 200 comments were submitted against the application. It has been opposed by Twyford Parish Council, by Charville Parish Council and by Wargrave Parish Council. And ward members for Charville and Twyford have submitted comments expressing their concerns. Most of those concerns relate to the cumulative impact of development along the A4 corridor and the anxieties about what that will mean in terms of change to the area, in particular pressure on local infrastructure. We've heard about school places, we've heard about highways. They're also concerned about capacity at doctors' surgeries. And we've heard about flooding, and flooding is clearly a major concern, not only in Twyford, but downstream on the Loddon in Charville. On a lot of these infrastructure concerns, however, the statutory consultees, those people who have to be consulted and provide expert advice, have all accepted the application as, in their view, something that could be supported. So this is where I think it's perhaps difficult for members of the public to appreciate how constrained members of the planning committee are by the planning system. We share all of your concerns. I certainly share them all. But where there is expert testimony that says they're all right, somebody like me would have to present equally expert testimony to combat that. I cannot, unfortunately, even though on the question of, in particular of highways modelling, which was one of the reasons I asked for a deferral in December, I quite frankly am flabbergasted by the modelling figures. They don't seem to bear much resemblance to what I would have imagined will come as a result of this. But I'm not in the position to contest them. I cannot present evidence of equal weight that would hold water if they were used as a basis for refusing the application. There are, however, some matters of judgment as opposed to technical expertise that come into play, and I want to come on to those in a few moments, if I may. The deferral in December was on very specific technical grounds, and the answers provided have, I concede, largely closed off further discussion on these matters. There's not much further I can push them, even though, as I've said, I have real concerns about particularly the highways aspects of this. Colleagues on the committee might recall that at that committee meeting in December, when I proposed deferral, I did touch upon the subject of the principle of development on the site, but said I would leave that aside for the moment. Well, that moment has come for me to go back to that central point about the principle of development on the site. And that's what I want to really address now. Now, this site is in the draft local plan. It's in the two versions of the draft local plan that have been produced so far. And in that sense, there is a presumption in favour of development. The developer would no doubt argue that the principle of development is established by its being a site allocated in the draft local plan for housing. That was not a site I would have favoured going in the draft local plan, but it's in there. But it's important to recognise the draft local plan is not the adopted local plan. The draft local plan carries relatively little weight. And in fact, Sophie, in her report, says in reality, we should regard this as an unallocated site. So therefore, we're not, I think, constrained by its presence in the draft local plan. So that means we need to measure it against the policies in the existing local plan, not in the draft emerging local plan that will cover the future, but the current local plan that runs to 2026. And that current local plan has a lot of policies that run against this application. I'd like to highlight in particular CP9 and CP11 and MDD policy CC02, all of which emphasise the importance of avoiding development outside the settlement boundary and in the countryside. And now I'm afraid I'm going to have to introduce a further level of complication into this discussion. We've heard already in the previous two applications the dreaded words tilted balance. And those come into play essentially when a council has no longer a 5-year land supply. This is not unusual in the later stages of an existing local plan. And unfortunately, this council ran out of a demonstrable 5-year land supply in February 2022. An appeal heard in February 2022 ruled that the council did not have a 5-year land supply. In that situation, national policies come into play that effectively trump our own local policies. And even taking into account the very special circumstances that explain why the council's fallen below a 5-year land supply, which Sophie alluded to, over provision in the early part of the current local plan has led to a shortage of sites at the end of the plan. Even taking that into account, even taking into account that the council had to draw up a second draft local plan because the first local plan was stymied by the intervention of the Ministry of Defence, ruling out a major development site in the south of the borough. Even taking those things into account, national policy contains a presumption in favour of development, and that, in the current circumstances, undoubtedly carries weight. Now, this national policy is in what's called the National Planning Policy Framework, and the particular policy that we have to take regard of is policy 11D, and this effectively tilts the balance in favour of development for all but a certain category of protected sites, or where the harm done by development outweighs the benefits when assessed against the policies of the National Planning Policy Framework, not against our own policies. Now, my reading of the list of categories of protected sites suggests that none cover this case, with the possible exception of the rather vague reference in a footnote to Roman numerals 2 of the explanations of this, and this footnote, sorry, Roman numeral 1, and this footnote refers also to areas at risk of flooding. When I read this, I of course immediately thought, well, this is an area at risk of flooding. Much of the application site lies in flood zone 3A. It could therefore be said to be an area clearly at risk of flooding. But we do need to take into account that the proposed built form is not in the areas that are at high risk of flooding. And as such, the Environment Agency, the statutory consultee in this case, has raised no objections. So regrettably, I don't think I can pursue that as a reason for refusal. Now, this brings me to the second consideration, whether the harm done outweighs the benefits. That's the other exception to the tilted balance, whether the harm done outweighs the benefits. And here I have to acknowledge two clear benefits. The first is the affordable housing contribution offered, and the second, the commitment to deliver carbon neutral homes. But I have to say, these commitments, while very welcome, are of course not yet tangible. They relate to what would happen or might happen or should happen if the development goes ahead. It seems to me that the harms are much more demonstrable in the sense that they will take place from the moment development commences. So what are these harms? Well, the first is that the development precludes future extraction of minerals and is therefore not in conformity with the National Policy Planning Framework paragraph 210C, which protects mineral safeguarding areas. And this site is identified as a mineral safeguarding area in our recently adopted Minerals and Waste Local Plan. That is a really important consideration. The second harm relates to the use of agricultural land. Our own local plan policy CP1 has a presumption against development of high quality agricultural land. More importantly, in the current context, given that tilted balance effectively means we should ignore our own local policies and just rely on the National Planning Policy Framework, that National Policy Framework, paragraph 174B, states that planning decisions should recognise, and I quote, the economic and other benefits of best and most versatile agricultural land. The land on this site includes land in grade 2, that's very good quality, and some in grade 3A, good quality. On balance, therefore, I conclude, and this again, it comes back to the point I was making, these are matters of judgment, they're not matters of measurement, they're matters of judgment. I conclude rather differently from Sophie. I conclude that the application should be refused on the grounds that it's contrary to National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 2110C, which protects mineral safeguarding areas, and National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 174B, which relates to the protection of the best and most versatile agricultural land. And on this last point, I would say particular weight should be attached to this objection at this time when matters of national food security have been brought very much to the forefront of our minds.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie. And thank you to all of the people who have spoken thus far this evening. As has been explained, the 6 reasons for deferral have been addressed in the documentation provided. Besides the improvements outlined regarding road safety and active travel, I also wish to note the applicant's commitment to meet the Future Homes standard to help support our council's environmental objectives. I hope that we see more applicants following Kudis's example. I've noted the presentations by the representative of Twyford Parish Council and also one of their residents. I was particularly moved by some of the photographic evidence of the impacts that this development, if approved, could have on the infrastructure and the ability of the infrastructure to cope with increasing housing numbers. I do want to follow up on 2 matters, though, that Councillor Conway has raised, and I would like to ask officers very specific questions about 2 of these matters. The first is the significance of the policy or the impact that this development, if approved, would have on the loss of agricultural land. Councillor Conway mentioned, I believe, that a lot of the site is classified as Category 2 and Category 3A currently. I'd like some guidance, as to planning policy with regards to the loss of high quality agricultural land. And I also noted that Councillor Conway raised some concerns, observations regarding the site, that part of this site is within a mineral safeguarding area. I note that in the officer's report, there is some fairly extensive discussion on that matter. I would just like confirmation of what that actually means, in planning terms and its relevance. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll try and assist you if I can on those 2 points. Excuse me. Firstly, regarding the loss of agricultural land, as you mentioned, it's stated in the original committee report that, yes, the site would result in the loss of a quantum of best, most versatile land. Just to quantify that, this would amount to 4.4 hectares of what would be classified as very good land and 4.3 hectares of good quality, so a total of 8.7 hectares of what would be classified as best, most versatile agricultural land. I think it's worth noting that Natural England did not object to the application on that basis. And in terms of their sort of involvement where there are concerns around loss of agricultural land, they require to be consulted when it would result in the loss of 20 hectares or more. So what they might consider to be a significant loss. I think our response in that sense would be that whilst, yes, there is technically a conflict with policy CP1, as I've said in the original report, we don't consider that amount is so significant so as to warrant a reason for refusal, particularly when you weigh it into the overall planning balance and the benefits that we consider that this proposal would bring, particularly with regards to the current situation with the 5-year housing land supply and also the affordable housing that would arise as a result. And I think in that sense, it's quite important to note that you are probably aware of recent appeal decisions that we've had where sites that we would consider less sustainable than this site, we have lost on appeal, and the benefit in terms of the affordable housing has been given significant weight. We're not currently meeting our yearly target of affordable housing in the borough, and this site would bring up to 80 because it's up to 200 dwellings. So if they got 200 dwellings on the site, it would be 80 affordable. And in our view, that's a significant benefit that, amongst the other benefits that we've outlined in the report, would outweigh that policy conflict. Just in terms of the minerals, as you mentioned, the original committee report does cover that matter, and it is acknowledged that it lies within an area as a mineral safeguarding area. The applicant provided information around the possible prior extraction of the site. However, the conclusion of that was that the site would not be of a size that would be economically viable. They did reach out to some local operators in that regard and had 2 responses, one from Cemex and Summerlees Limited. Both sort of responded in that they might be interested in taking extracted minerals from the site and processing them elsewhere, but not in terms of putting in an application for the setup. And I mean, that's a whole different application process and a lengthy one at that. And notwithstanding that, I think it's also important to note that whilst, yes, that site is included in the safeguarding area, there is a policy within the joint plan, policy DM9, which relates to the protection of health, safety and amenity. And in that supporting text, it does acknowledge that the process of extraction on sites can be demonstrably harmful to surrounding amenity, and recommends that sites should have a minimum buffer zone of 100 metres from the nearest sensitive human receptors, such as homes and schools. So in this regard, the applicant provided a plan that showed what a 100-metre buffer would look like from the nearest sensitive receptors on the site. It's also important to note that there is a dwelling located in the site, and that left an area, I think, of I don't have the actual plan to hand, but just over a hectare, I believe, a very, very small area that I don't think any mineral operator would be interested in. And actually, I think that site would potentially give rise to a lot of concern in terms of potential impact were the possibility of it being used for prior extraction take place. Just to finish, notwithstanding that, just it's important to note that actually within the recommended construction environmental management plan condition, there is, however, 2 clauses that would require the operator to, so I'm just trying to find the wording. Sorry, here we go. So the condition requires a method for ensuring that minerals that can be viably recovered during the development operations are recovered and put to beneficial use. And secondly, that a method to record the quantity of the recovered mineral, reuse on site or off site, is reported to the LPA upon completion of the development. So that's the sort of the minimum incidental extraction is what we're talking about. And we've come to our conclusion on that basis.
Thank you for all that, Sophie.
Rebecca?
Thank you, Madam Chair. From reading this report, I think to myself the harm of this development, and Councillor Conway this evening has said that we can't argue against the traffic modelling because it's an assessment by our officers. I do that the figures that are provided are incredibly conservative, to say the least. Peak hour 32 trips, we're talking about 200 dwellings. How many cars? We all know how many people live in households, children, older children that are at home with cars. And I am a little bit confused about the access as well, with the secondary access out. There seems to be 2 accesses into the site, with the main one onto Bath Road. Can somebody clarify for me the access over the railway bridge, not knowing the site personally, knowing the area? There appears to be, there will be vehicular access, but with a kind of give way. How will that work? So if somebody could clarify that for me to start with, because will vehicles be using that as a main access as well?
Sophie, would you like to reply?
Sorry, could you repeat that, the
Would
question?
would you
Sorry,
like-
apologies. I missed the last bit of the question. Sorry. I know Rebecca was querying
Yeah,
the.
there's the two entrances. So there's the main entrance onto Bath Road, which there's a roundabout. Then there's a further access which looks it to go out the back, which is over a railway bridge, if I'm correct. It looks like it's single file. What will that access be? Single lane. Will that access be used for? Would that be a main access into the site as well?
So you're talking, sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about the two accesses on the A4, it's the secondary access you're referring to?
Sorry, I'm obviously not making myself very clear. There seems to be a separate access where there's over a railway bridge. Am I correct?
To the south end
Yeah.
of the site. Sorry, apologies. I misinterpreted. I thought you were talking about along the A4 because there are two accesses along there. Beg your pardon. So that access is not proposed to be for vehicular use. It's proposed to be for pedestrian and cycle access only. And the slide that I showed in the presentation was to demonstrate what improvements could be made in order to manage the pedestrian and cycle potential conflicts with traffic associated with a nursery. Obviously, that would be at certain times of the day, but there won't be any vehicles permitted in conjunction with the site to use that access. It's purely from the A4.
So I think that's clear for me that there is only one access into this site for over 200 properties onto the Bath Road, which even more makes me want to challenge the evidence that we've had submitted here in front of us and the amount of traffic that will be onto Bath Road. We're talking about as well creating a green infrastructure where we're expecting children and people to use cycle routes, bikes, pedestrians, but we're not making any of these areas attractive for anybody. I have this in my own ward that actually want to cycle and want to be a pedestrian, but are put off by excessive traffic, fumes, and the health hazards that come with it. So I agree with, well, I don't agree with Stephen and that obviously that we cannot, can we or can't we, but I think this should be looked at as a whole, as looking at the scheme as a real concern when we look at it collectively with all the other issues that are involved with this application, with this single access onto the Bath Road and the increased traffic. And I would like to question the modelling.
Sorry, could I just jump in on that? So there is actually two accesses, bit of an echo. There's actually two accesses off Bath Road. There's the main roundabout access and a secondary access. And essentially there's and the access to the south is for pedestrian cyclists. But there is a nursery in there and some houses, so they have access to in from the south over the railway bridge that you're referring to. The Bath Road has been improved, so it's been increased to 3 metres wide, and they're putting in a toucan crossing, so formal crossing. So from a transport point of view, it meets the tests of what they look at to assess. The modelling is based on national modelling, so essentially it's data that and modelling that's used not only in the UK but across the world, and that's the data that you have to look at as a transport planner. And Cameron might jump in a minute to see where the traffic is going and to predict where it's going to go when there's traffic and all those other things. So it does meet the requirements of the highway and the council's policies.
I just briefly come back on that. So when we have evidence as well presented to us by members of the public, which is visible evidence, we obviously can't use that. When we know that there is already queuing cars at that roundabout, excessive traffic at certain times of day, can we not use that as a consideration that we can look at?
There's a level, I'm going to let Cameron jump in because he's the expert on this, but there is a level of traffic that is considered to be acceptable, even if there is traffic. So there is traffic. We all know there's traffic in Twyford, and this will add some traffic to that, but there is a dispersion of traffic and at different times across the site. They'll be leaving the site essentially. So that's what the national model looks at. It doesn't look at all 200 units coming out at the same time, going down the same road. So it disperses it, and then within that, there's a figure that essentially junctions and highways kind of fall over, I'll call it, where they actually don't function. And at that point, you have to improve them, and you have to carry out junction improvements and things like that. Cameron, do you want to jump in and clarify? Are you there?
Yeah, Connor, thank you very much for giving opportunity. Actually, the traffic modeling has been undertaken, the trip distribution has been undertaken from the WSTM4 modeling, and is showing that 50% traffic going towards the east, towards the Wargrove A4 roundabout. And I have checked the impact of the development traffic. So impact of development traffic is only 2.5%. Like there's already 2,500 traffic on the roundabout, and the development is only ending 44 trips in the AM peak. So which is the worst case scenario. And we have also undertaken traffic modeling check, and it's showing that the RFC's values, which is the threshold for the congestion, is is equal to the 0.85, where the junction start congestion. So the worst case scenario is showing the queue length of 6 vehicles on A4 West. So that with all modeling, this junction has been checked, and stringent check has been undertaken by the officer. So we think that they still are like modeling showing that there is spare capacity for the junction. And one thing more, Conrad, I want to add regarding the trip rate information. Like for 200 vehicles, if you look at the TRIC database, which has a national sites here, similar sites of similar units, that show that the site will be generating 82 trips, not the 400 vehicles trip. That is based on the AM peak and PM peak. So in worst case scenario, the driver will be generating 82 vehicles trips. So at the rate of 0.5 trips per unit.
Okay. I've got 3 questions for Sophie. One, how does tilted balance affect this application? The second one is, how will this affect our 5-year land supply? And the third is, how much can we take into account the air quality changes caused by a new site?
Thank you, Rochelle. Sorry, I'm just making a note. So the first question was around the tilted balance. The second one was on the 5-year housing land supply. And sorry, what was the third question?
Air quality effects on of a newer site.
Okay. So the first point relating to the tilted balance. So obviously in any scheme, there are often identified harmful impacts associated with development proposals. As noted in the original report, this does sit outside the existing settlement boundaries. It's not an allocated site, so technically it's contrary to policy, but due to the fact that we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, the policies that are considered the most important, if you like, for determining the application are considered out of date, and the tilted balance is engaged. So what we then look at is whether any harmful impacts associated with the proposals would significantly and adversely outweigh the perceived benefits. And within the report, and as discussed at a committee in December and this evening, Office's view are that whilst there are some impacts, we're not trying to dispute that. Our view is that the benefits that would arise as a result of the proposal, with regards to it, we do believe it's in a sustainable location. It's within walking distance to Twyford train station. The affordable housing and the delivery of housing in general to contribute towards a 5-year housing land supply. Our view is that any harmful impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and I would argue that planning permission should be approved in accordance with the presumption in favour of sustainable development under the NPPF. In terms of how this would affect our 5-year housing land supply, I don't know the exact impact that it would have, and I think it's probably safe to say it's not going to solve it. But I think it's also fair to say that it would contribute to improving it, both with regards to the market housing, but also possibly more significantly the affordable housing contribution that it would make to our current housing need. The air quality matter. So I think we discussed this at the December committee with regards to air quality. An air quality assessment report was submitted with the application, and it was reviewed by our environmental health officers. And they agreed with the conclusion that the development, the air quality impacts associated with the development would not result in demonstrably harmful impacts on the air quality levels within the AQMA. They noted that air quality levels have been improving sort of steadily over the last few years. Admittedly, we need to take into account the pandemic, but notwithstanding that, I think overall the air quality is improving in general. So there wasn't a concern raised in that regard. However, as Chris Roberts, the agent, noted, they are providing a £20,000 contribution, which is not something that's required in terms of mitigation. It's been offered by the developer to assist in whatever way the council feels would be helpful, whether that's monitoring or other initiatives. And we consider that also to be a welcomed aspect of the application.
John?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It's very interesting listening tonight, because it would seem that it's been suggested we don't approve this on the basis that we don't have an up-to-date land supply or up-to-date LPU, and that we revert back to the existing one that we know is out of date. What's the risks in doing that?
Do you want to show off your?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the risk is we lose appeal after appeal after appeal, and the government will not agree with that, because essentially, if you haven't got your housing land supply, the tilted balance that we've all heard tonight and will hear many, many times again, needs to be applied. And if it's not significant and demonstrably outweigh the benefits that the scheme will achieve, and you've got to remember this, we look at the social, economic and environmental benefits that a scheme might bring forward to weigh against what it is. But essentially, if you're looking at how you look at sites is where they're located. So somewhere in the countryside obviously has less weight attached to it than somewhere in Twyford that's essentially attached to Twyford, that you can actually walk and cycle to the train station and to the shops. So my opinion would be, if you start down this road where you're refusing things on the basis that we should be running by our old policies, we will lose every appeal going. That is not what we can do as professional officers, and the inspectors will hammer us, and the government will hammer us as well because of that. So you need to look at that. Everything changes when the tilted balance is applied. Now, that doesn't say that every site is acceptable. They're not. There's lots of sites that will not be acceptable, but a site like this, which is adjacent to a major development settlement area, near to trains, near to shops, near to schools, this is the site you would look at to promote before a site is promoted elsewhere. Although the local plan is the new local plan hasn't gone through the various processes it needs to gather weight, we do have to remember this site was put forward by the council in the next local plan's allocation, so it has to go through that test. But it was one of the sites that was looked at, was assessed to be a more acceptable site and put forward for that allocation.
Just one further question then. The numbers are very large. This is a very large development. With the delay in the local plan and the allocation of sites and moving forward, could it put the council in a dangerous position with regards to other applicants who would have expected to be included in the local plan? And if they're not included in the local plan, when it does finally come along, could they argue the fact that you haven't, obviously we're not in the local plan because you've allowed these houses to be built, even though you didn't have a local plan? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Essentially, you're saying that if this site was approved, other sites that might be more suitable may not come forward. There's not when you apply the tilted balance. Essentially, you have to get back to your 5-year supply. Obviously, regulations might change in the future, but the current government guidance is you have to meet your 5-year supply. So we have to infill that gap between where we are, which is just under 4 years, to the 5 years to get to where we need to be. So we have to have sites coming forward, and the issue is if you start refusing these sites, you end up in a position that other sites, which are far less sustainable, are likely to be accepted by the inspectors, because you're not. I think one site, to give you probably a recent example, a site over in Spencer's Wood, which is a lot smaller. I think it was about 40 units or a little bit more, but that actually sits within the DEPZ, which is the zone around Burfield if things go wrong. And the inspector found that that site is less sustainable. The inspector found that the benefits, as in the affordable housing provision, outweighed the harm in that area, and that is in a very different location, and not near as sustainable as this site. And we have appeal after appeal that does that, and you can look up and down the country, and it's the same scenario for every council who finds themselves in this position.
David? Thank you, Chair. I read through the Twyford neighbourhood plan, looking keenly for something we could latch on to help the people of Twyford in this. It is, I think, unfortunate that the Twyford neighbourhood plan didn't oppose this site. I don't think it specifically endorsed it, but it was unfortunate that there was no protest against it. I'm also surprised there wasn't mentioned in the neighbourhood plan of the risk of closing the gap in the coalescence between Twyford and Chervil, because this clearly is filling in that countryside, not completely. That would have been a concern to me, but the thing I do come back to is the point that Councillor Margetts made a few minutes ago about traffic. And my concern is this: I know Twyford, I probably go through it about once a week, which in itself begs a question of the traffic flow through there if I'm going through there all the way from Finchampstead. The officer made the point that it was, I think he said 2.5% increase in traffic volumes, but it always is going to be. If you've got a crowded crossroads like Twyford is, and I can think of several in Finchampstead as well, any development by definition is only going to be a small percentage increase on what is already a choke point. Already this evening, we've approved a development which, by my dodgy calculations on a map, is 1.86 miles away from this location for 50 to 54 dwellings, and that's, I don't know, 120 cars? 57, whatever, it's 100, it's another 100 plus cars on the same road feeding into that same junction. But we make no mention of that here. We don't look at these in combination. You could actually imagine little plots of, quite large plots of 200 houses all the way along the A4 between Reading and Maidenhead. Each one in their individual circumstance would be insignificant, but if it was 20,000 houses in one block, we'd protest. So there's never a trigger point where we say, actually, beyond this point, the air pollution and the traffic flow at this point is a significant issue. And I think that's a major flaw in the way we're assessing these applications.
So just to, oh, sorry.
Thank you for the applause, but we really can't have your applause for this. Thank you. Officers, Sophie, would you like to have comments on this?
I was actually hoping that Cameron might be able to shed some light in terms of traffic modelling and.
I'll just jump in for a second before Cameron comes in. So there is traffic on that area. There is an impact from this development, absolutely. Again, as officers, we have to assess it on industry standard modelling. Our model for Woking is one of the most up-to-date models going. It doesn't look at just Woking, it looks at traffic in Reading and Bracknell, all those places in Oxford. So it looks at where traffic's going. There is a point in any development, so that model gets updated. So it looks at developments going forward, and where developments are seen to cause issues to, for instance, junctions, those junctions need to be improved. But I think the argument of there is additional issues to a town or an area, if it doesn't fall outside the model, which is what we live and die by as planners and transport planners, essentially you can't run that argument, because the whole of the southeast would have no more development, because the whole of the southeast is quite busy, as you know. So it's based on industry standard. So I think Stephen was saying earlier that he doesn't agree with the model, and I think a lot of local people probably don't in most cases across the borough and elsewhere. But we have to base our judgments on the model, and the Woking model looks at traffic locally. It looks at traffic data, how people go from from work to home to schools. So it's based on your mobile phone data, on GPS data, and it all feeds into the model to give a picture of how the network functions. And where there is generally a blockage, people will try and get around the blockage, and the model will take that into account. So there is absolutely going to be an impact. We're not saying there isn't, but it's not significant enough to refuse the application on that basis because of the size of the site, and because of the amount of traffic. It won't all come out at the same time, essentially, and it'll be the same with the other site. Cameron, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, Connor, actually, I agree with you. Actually, the modeling was undertaken through the data taken from the WSTM4 traffic modeling, which is a strategic traffic model. And the applicant has also undertaken the traffic survey to validate the model. And so in terms of traffic generation, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, like 200 houses generating 400 trips. It's actually, we have a trick database where we have to find out the trip rate information, like average trip rates. So if you apply this average trip rate on the AM peak hours, this development will be generating 82 trips. Then this trip generation will be that we have used the traffic distribution to distribute this traffic on the network. And this showing that this 50% traffic will going towards the east, towards the Wargiv roundabout. And as I said, the impact, if you just manually calculate the impact, is showing 2.5%. But if you go through the modeling process and if you calculate, it's showing that it's still within the RFC of 0.85, and which is the threshold where junction start congestion. So still, if it is over 1, then you can say that the junction is over capacity and it should be like behaving irrationally. And if you look at the NPPF paragraph 1111, which says development should only be prevented or refused on highway ground if there will be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. So the cumulative impact is not like RFCs are still within the capacity. So it's not over 1 where we have to raise concern or we have to object or we have to ask for the mitigation. So that has been checked by the officer in terms of mitigation and modeling.
Stephen?
Thank you. If I may just try and respond to some of the points that have been raised both by colleagues and by officers. If I can start with David's point about the gap between settlements. I did think about this very carefully. There is no reference, unfortunately, to gaps between settlements in the National Planning Policy Framework, and that's what we have to judge this on. Which, of course, brings me to John's point. I perhaps didn't explain myself clearly enough, but I was not recommending refusal on the basis of our own local policies, on the basis of our own local plan. I was saying that the tilted balance meant that national policy took precedence, and national policy was what I was using as my justification for refusal. I was referring to policies in the National Planning Policy Framework, specific policies there.
The ability of...
I accept that our own local policies, although they are contrary to this, are just reduced to a point of almost total weakness by the tilted balance. On Rebecca's point, emotionally and logically, I agree with you 100%. I find it difficult to see the site as sustainable in the way that Sophie was describing, because the truth of the matter is that if the development goes ahead, those dwellings in the northern part of the site in particular, people are not going to walk or cycle to the station from there. It's a noble ambition to think they will, and it would be great if they did. But the reality, especially on a rainy day in February, is they won't. They will not probably drive down to Twyford Station. They'll be deterred by the cost of parking there and the impossibility of parking there. They'll actually get a lift from another family member. And that will mean an additional 1 trip to take them to the station, 1 trip for the person who's taken them there to come back, another trip in the evening for the person to come and collect them, and another trip back. So 4 traffic movements through the already very congested crossroads generated by simply 1 house. So it is unfortunately all local knowledge would suggest that these trip rates are not really going to accord very much with the reality. But I cannot present hard technical evidence to dispute them any more than any of us can on the committee. If the application were to be refused, of course, and it would go to appeal, then it would be open to everyone to present evidence of whatever kind they could muster. And that evidence would be heard by the appeal inspector. And he or she would make a judgment on that. But we as a planning committee, cannot, I think, on matters of technical assessment and measurement, offer a counter view. So that's why I've tried to limit my suggested reasons for refusal to matters that are not matters of measurement and technical expertise, but matters of judgment. And the judgment here is, do the harms outweigh the benefits? I've openly acknowledged there are benefits, but I've identified two harms which I think we need to take into account. Now, I've heard, of course, the response, Sophie's response, relating to both the best and most versatile agricultural land and the mineral safeguarding area. And of course, I respect her judgment. I can exactly see why she's saying what she's saying. So the essence is, this is too small a site in both cases to be relevant. But what I would say, and this may sound overly punctilious, but National Planning Policy Framework Policy 11D, Roman brackets 2, says any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. I've quoted the policies in this framework. All of the other things that were brought in by Sophie to cast doubt on the relevance of those points are not in the framework. There are other evidence or other opinion offered by other parties. So I'm trying to construct what I think is a logical and reasonable and defensible reason for refusal, which is based on the National Planning Policy Framework. And I have proposed it, although nobody perhaps noticed because it was such a long speech getting there, but I did propose that on balance, I was going to propose a refusal on the grounds that the application is contrary to policy NPPF paragraph 210 brackets C, which protects mineral safeguarding areas. This is a mineral safeguarding area identified in our own local mineral and waste plan, recently adopted by the council, and on the grounds that it's contrary to policy MPPF paragraph 174 brackets B, relating to the protection of the best and most versatile agricultural land. And the National Planning Policy Framework enjoins us to take into account policies in that framework when we're assessing the balance between harms and benefits. And that's what I've sought to do.
Is there a second for this? Yeah, okay. 1 second. Okay. Chris, you haven't spoken yet, so.
Thank you. It's true. We do need to refuse. We do need to show harm. And Stephen's putting forward the agricultural land and the mineral extraction as reasons. I think Sophie did deal with those effectively. And even if they're true, I have to say they are pretty minor in comparison with the tilted balance and the fact that this site is twice, I think, put into the emerging local plan update, there was a much greater reason to approve the application than to refuse. So even if you accept the arguments about minerals and the agricultural land, I think they're clearly outweighed in the present situation by the tilted balance and the fact that this site is or was at some point in the LPU.
John, were you going to second it, or are you planning on giving it?
No, I just wanted to really ask that Chris has covered the points, but I wanted to know from the officers their view on those reasons put forward.
Well, I think Sophie earlier on gave her opinion on mineral extraction. Essentially, when you look at the recommendations for safeguarding the buffer zones, it takes out most of the site. There's only a very small amount of the site remaining to be able to extract. You've also got the complication of the railway line, which clearly would have a major impact potentially from Network Rail, or a major objection from Network Rail. You have a condition on the application that Sophie mentioned about the developers doing their best to extract minerals at the time of construction. I think on the mineral extraction, it's, as a resident of Twyford, I would not want to see that locally, but you careful what you wish for. So there's a huge amount more traffic generated and heavy HGV traffic that would go through the village, and that would obviously have early impacts. But I think Sophie covered the points earlier on, as I was saying. Essentially, the area for the mineral extraction is not big enough to be viable. The two companies came back and said they're not really, because they're hugely expensive applications. They're hugely complicated, as we all know, who's dealt with them. So they want big sites, and essentially they want sites that are kind of in the middle of nowhere as well. So they don't have as many objections. So I think that's the one point Sophie covered. The other point on the agricultural land, the Natural England guidance, which is what it's based on. Essentially, it is looked at a geological map of the UK, and it looks at what's there, and it gives an assessment of where it's good and where it's not. And then the idea is then you assess it in detail as part of an application. And obviously, we've got grades 1 to 3A, I think, on this site. And Sophie mentioned it was 8.7 hectares. Whether 8.7 hectares would be considered a viable farmstead, I don't think it would, but I think you need to again go back to the benefits of the housing and the scheme against that area of land. And if you look at the tilted balance, which again puts a site like this in favour of development as opposed to not, my opinion would be any inspector would probably not side with the local authority on that, because you're getting 200 units, 80 affordable units, homes that are much more sustainable, socio and economic benefits to the town. It's 200 units, so it's quite a few extra residents from an economic point of view. And they're the bits that an inspector will weigh against any application. I think Chris did say, and he's right to say, that we did put the site in the local plan process twice, and that would be argued by any applicant. You've put it forward, so you obviously don't think it's worth keeping, despite the fact it hasn't gone through the due process. So that's the line of argument that they would take. So professionally, from my opinion, and as what Sophie said earlier, I think it stands up that when you weigh it against the housing benefit, so to speak, and I know people here don't think there is a housing benefit, but in planning terms, if you weigh it against the housing benefit against the retention of a small parcel of agricultural land, which is 8-9 hectares essentially, it wouldn't weigh favourably in the best agricultural land argument, is what I would say.
Stephen?
Thank you. I can see I'm having to work for my supper tonight. Let me just try to reassure Chris first of all. I'm very aware of the tilted balance the tilted balance calculation means that because the council has no 5-year land supply, there's a presumption in favour of development, unless, and this is what the policy says, where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, that means you haven't got a 5-year land supply, granting permission is the norm, unless, and it's the unless, the reasons why you might put aside this presumption in favour of development, and I've tried to focus on this evening, and I've looked at the policies in the framework in order to demonstrate why I believe you could refuse this application, even though the tilted balance is in play. So it's not, does the tilted balance overcome my arguments? My arguments are based on the assumption that the tilted balance is at work, but the tilted balance includes some provisos that I've tried to explore this evening. So I think that's the point I need to make. I think I also need to make the point that, you know, so far as the minerals and waste local plan that we adopted recently was concerned, this was a site that was included as a safeguarding area. Now, its viability at present is a matter that, you know, experts may well say, no, it's not viable. But, you know, my understanding of a safeguarding area is you're not saying it's necessarily something you want to use now, but you're safeguarding it for the future. That's why it's in the local mineral and waste plan. It's to protect future supply. So its viability now is, I'm willing to accept it may not be viable in current circumstances, but that's not really the point. The point is the framework says that if it's identified as an affordable, as a mineral safeguarding area, there's a presumption against development there. That's the point I'm trying to make. So it's the question of current viability, to my mind, is secondary to the security in the long term of that site and its availability. Otherwise, it presumably would never have appeared in our local mineral and waste plan as a site to be protected. Agricultural land issue, I can see that there's the advice from Natural England is that they would only consider this as relevant in applications of 20 hectares or more. And this site, as has been explained, is only 8.7. So on the face of it, this is, again, an argument that's pretty strong against my contention that this it needs to be protected because it's in the National Planning Policy Framework mentioned as a consideration when you are weighing up how to apply or whether to apply the presumption in favour of development. I have to say this farm is surrounded by other farms, which are not large, but collectively they would certainly exceed 20 hectares. So if this goes piecemeal way, all of the others could go too. But collectively, they would definitely add up to more than 20 hectares. So I would like to persist in the face of what seemed like impossible odds. I would like to persist with my proposal that we refuse this application on those two grounds, that it's contrary to national planning policy framework policies. I'm still looking for a seconder, but maybe I'm looking in vain.
David, you want to say something?
Yes, Chair. I mean, I think I have something of a reputation within our group as being the patron saint of lost causes, and I have a desperate desire to stand foursquare with Councillor Conway on this one. But I'm reminded of the ancient words of the Duke of Wellington, which was never reinforce defeat, and I fear that is where we are heading for on this, and we should perhaps decide that discretion is the better part of valour.
Is there a seconder or an alternative proposal? I'm sorry, Stephen, that falls, then there isn't a seconder. An alternative proposal. Andrew?
I propose that we recommend that we approve this application.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Those opposed?
Could I ask for my vote against to be recorded?
Yes, you can. The application was accepted. Could everybody please, we have a lot more to consider. Okay, could everybody please exit and discuss this outside? I want to do Townhouse first and then do the break. I know.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we do have other applications to consider. Could you please continue your discussion outside the room?
Yes, I.
Yes. Sorry.
So you ready?
The next application is item number 82, Townhouse Bridge. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening all. This application was deferred at January's Planning Committee to allow further engagement between WBC and the applicant Network Rail and to allow the committee to make a more informed decision on the application. Shortly after the deferral, a meeting was held between WBC Planning and Highways officers as well as Network Rail, and further engagement between Highways and Network Rail has progressed positively since. It has become clear through this engagement that the provision of ramps will need to be secured outside of the planning process dictated by this type of prior approval application, particularly to secure funding and land transfer, which is required. Crucially, the design of the current proposal allows ramps to be retrofitted if it is not possible to secure the provision of ramps prior to when the existing bridges have to be demolished. It is understood that the existing bridges are due to be demolished before the end of this year, and there remains a risk that there would be no provision for any form of replacement bridge following demolition if the applicant is unable to progress with the step design. Highways officers have raised no objection to the applicant progressing with the step design under this application while these separate processes are carried out. Notwithstanding the outcome of these separate processes, it is still considered that the proposed location of the footbridge, which would span the railway at essentially the same points of the existing footbridges, is appropriate. There is not any other location that is more suited to the provision of the proposed footbridge. Additionally, the proposed design and external materials of the proposed footbridge would be of a good quality, which would reflect its urban setting and mark a significant improvement in visual terms compared to the existing dilapidated bridge crossing. It is considered that the amenity of the area would not be injured in terms of visual impact, and as already highlighted, the local planning authority is not able to take other considerations into account in this instance. Notwithstanding the outcome of the ongoing engagement between WBC and Network Rail, under the strict parameters of this prior approval application, the proposal complies with both points we can consider, siting and appearance. It is therefore recommended that the prior approval of the local planning authority should be granted, subject to the informatives included in Appendix 1 of the committee report. These informatives encourage further engagement, and it should be highlighted that the granting of this proposal does not prevent a revised application being submitted in the future.
Imogen, I believe you're online.
Yes, I am. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with what I said last time, but basically, representing Wokingham Town Council in this instance, I wholeheartedly would agree to anything that would support getting us a bridge with ramped access. The main sort of concern design aspect that would remain from that point onwards is the perforated steel. As I said in my previous speech, is that perforated steel causes problems with graffiti because the paint gets stuck inside the perforations and you can't clean it out, and it leaves a shadow of whatever graffiti that was on there. So I would certainly ask the committee to reconsider the design aspects of perforated steel. But yes, if we can get ramped access and if Network Rail is willing to work with us, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Sharing 3 minutes.
Okay, Alex Tran and Natalie Wilson will be sharing 3 minutes.
Oh,
Alex
hello.
is online.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for once again allowing me to speak. At the last planning meeting, I outlined the reasons the current bridge should be rejected. Today, I would like to thank the councillors who spoke up against the bridge design and encourage you to continue this work until a proper accessible bridge is built. As someone who believes in local democracy, it was heartening to see so many object to the bridge in its current design, despite being told this was a done deal that the council had no power to oppose. You, as our elected representatives, were reflecting the strength of community feeling against this bridge, a small fraction of which was demonstrated by a petition against the design that gained over 300 signatures in the few weeks it was live before it was submitted to Network Rail. Reading the meeting agenda documents, it's great to see that after a meeting with Network Rail on February the 3rd, positive progress has been made. This implies that if the borough can obtain the land and funding and finalise planning for ramps by August, Network Rail will be able to contribute to the ramps using the money currently set aside for steps. I call on you, the councillors and your relevant officers to pull out all the stops to work with Network Rail on what sounds like a very tight timescale to make this happen and get the bridge that Wokingham residents need and want designed and built. Our future is in your hands, so over to you. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm speaking again as a local resident that travels actively every day. I spoke at the last meeting because how strongly I feel about the necessity of a safe, accessible, lower pollution route from the south into the town centre. As a resident, I felt very supported by our councillors at the last meeting, and by deferring your decision, you have already made a difference. You have our best interest at heart, and I thank you. Network Rail are still arguing that their equality responsibilities are met, as the new bridge will be no worse than the current temporary bridge. The current bridge is temporary, and presumably replaced what was an accessible crossing at street level. Where was the equality assessment for this? Network Rail should not be basing an equality study on a temporary solution. They are still being discriminatory against anyone who cannot travel using a stepped crossing. It was obvious that Network Rail and the council needed to collaborate more closely for progress to be made. I was very pleased to see the outcome of the 3rd of February meeting. It brings us one step closer to achieving a step-free, traffic-free access. It is going to be tight for time, but I implore all councillors, officers and Network Rail staff to work hard enough and fast enough to meet Network Rail's August deadline. They need to get the bridge right first time, saving money, materials and waste, thereby delivering an accessible bridge. I am already imagining, dreaming of how much healthier, safer and easier my active travelling life would be. I certainly am not alone in these dreams. Please help us get this bridge right first time.
Thank you. And next person will be Damien Haynes, the applicant.
My name is Damien Hines. I'm here to speak for the applicant. It is Network Rail's position that there are no permissible grounds for refusing the prior approval that's been made out by the office already. I will not rehearse that in the interests of expediency. This view is also expressed in the Council's committee report, as well as quite persuasively set out in a succession of planning inspectorate decisions. Network Rail has agreed to this extension to allow it to explore with the Borough Council some of the concerns rightly raised by members in the January committee. But as you will be aware, we are an arm's length public body, which is subject to public sector equality duty flowing from the Equality Act 2010. And contrary to some of the views expressed, we do not have a positive duty or duty to take positive steps. Our duty is to have due regard to the needs of those with protected characteristics. And in the exercise of that duty, we've conducted first when we sought to close the level crossing, Townhouse level crossing, we've carried out a diversity impact assessment to estimate what level of detriment could be caused to those mobility impaired, frail, infirm, etc., by provision of a footbridge. And the outcome of that was, patently, the setup then wasn't accessible at all. Neither was the crossing, nor was the footbridge, which one needs to negotiate to traverse completely from one side of the railway to the other. But having recognized that, if the fundamental question put to us is, should points of crossing over the railway be accessible? The answer is, of course, yes. And in that spirit, we have engaged positively with the Borough Council, and we've continued dialogue for a number of years since the crossing was closed. One of the practical outcomes of that was the Memorandum of Understanding. So we've set up a framework for collaboration on that. And this was the case also when we've proposed to reconstruct or replace the current 2-footbridge setup with a single span footbridge. And we've conducted a subsequent diversity impact assessment to assess what detriment to the travelling public provision of a single span footbridge could have. And of course, when compared to the current status quo, one is bound to objectively conclude that provision of a single span footbridge is a material improvement, even though it is not equipped with ramps. There is, as was set out by the officer, a clear intention to work collaboratively with the Borough Council to provide the ramps.
Could you please sum up?
Yes. So in light of that, we have designed a bridge to allow for retrofitting of ramps, and we are in the process of carrying out a feasibility study to work out if, in fact, provision of ramps is possible. And against that backdrop, I would like to respectfully invite members to grant prior approval. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, thank you. I note the comment of some of the other speakers about what was said at the previous meeting last month when the approval here was deferred. I have to say, I think that was the work of the planning committee at its best, and I commend all members of the planning committee for the robust arguments that we put forward in the face of what was verging on unacceptable pressure from officers at that meeting. But what we won was a month for the council to engage with Network Rail and to find a solution to this. And I do have some sympathy for Network Rail when I note that discussions have been going on since 2016. And as the fundamentals here about finding the money for the project and the land to build it upon, which isn't rocket science, I find it quite, I don't know what word to use, but certainly not in the council's sort of good reputation that they spent so long addressing this and getting nowhere. So we can hope that in the few months that are available to actually come to a conclusion, they now extract their finger, to use a technical term, get on with it and actually come to an agreement with Network Rail that would deliver the project that we all want. And with that in mind, I think we've made our point, and I hope that all parties will follow this through to a satisfactory outcome.
I have only one thing to say. It's a shame that all public projects should be accessible to all residents of Woking, not just residents who are normally abled. This is not the right thing to do. I don't care if the Equalities Act says something or another. I think it's the wrong thing to do. Thank you. John?
Yes, thank you very much. I expect people are sick and tired of hearing me preach about this, but my view is quite clear. We've gone as far as we can. It shouldn't be with the planning committee now. The decision needs to be with the council, and maybe the town council might think about some of its seal and putting that into it. The residents really feel strongly about this, and I would urge the borough council and the town council to meet with the railway authorities and actually do something about it.
Anybody else want to speak? Is there a proposal?
So I
Oh,
just say, yeah, I mean, I think we made our point at the last meeting, but you know, we shouldn't. I mean, if we risk losing right of way, I mean, no one's going to gain. So I mean, if Network Rail have got their track possession in December, I mean, we shouldn't be standing in their way of using that, because we may just lose the whole right of way for everyone.
John, do you want to make a proposal?
Yes, it's permitted development, and I would suggest that we approve this. But please let my my suggestions stand, if you like, about help from the borough and the town council, because it is obviously something residents really value. Thank you.
I will second exactly what John has just said.
Okay, go to the vote, please. Those in favor of approval? I abstain.
Let's take the break for 10 minutes.
At this point, we're going to take a break for 10 minutes and come back at 12:30. Okay, we're going on to item number 83, Library Parade, application 222367. Adriana is the officer.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can see me and hear me, and you can see my screen as well.
Yes.
Brilliant. Good evening, everyone. This is planning application 222367 at Library Parade in Woodley for the proposed creation of a mixed-use building consisting of the retention of the existing ground floor retail units, an addition of 16 new residential apartments with extensions to the building, associated car parking, cycle, and bin store. This is the location plan. The subject building is located fronting Library Parade within the Woodley Town Centre and consists of a two-story detached building with parking area to the rear, retail units at ground floor, and offices on the first floor. This is an aerial view of the site. The building sits opposite to a three-story mixed-use building with the Lidl supermarket on the ground floor, a surgery at first floor, and residential flats on the top floor. As you can see, there are other 3- and 4-story mixed-use buildings in close proximity within the main shopping precinct. The building is in a highly sustainable location within the site, within the town centre. These are the existing floor plans and the elevations. And these are existing views of the site and its surroundings. As can be seen, there is already a close proximity, a close relationship between the subject building and the Lidl building. However, this is not considered to create a wind tunnel effect, how it's called, as these buildings are not tall enough to create such an issue. These are other existing views of the site, of the rear of the site, and these are views from the first floor of the building. So this is the proposed site layout. The new residential units will be located within the 2 floor levels added to the existing building, and also within the 3-story extension to the rear of the site. Parking provision is proposed for 10 car parking spaces. 2 of them will be accessible spaces. Cycle stores and bin stores are also provided to the south of the plot within the car park area. This is the proposed ground floor plan, where you can see that a closer look of the proposed car park arrangement. The ground floor retail units are proposed to be retained and will remain unchanged. And these are the rest of the proposed floor plans. And note that the new and second floor, the new second and third floor levels are recessed back on the front elevation, and this is to reduce visual dominance and also allow a bigger separation distance with regard to the residential flats on top of the Lidl supermarket. These are the proposed elevations. The overall height of the building as extended will be comparable to the height of the Lidl building, and the scale, design, and appearance will also be similar to other mixed-use buildings within the town centre. And this is a proposed section of the site. These are proposed visual street images of the proposed development in the context of the site and the Woodley Town Centre. It is noted that materials, boundary treatments, and landscaping details are all to be agreed as pre-commencement conditions. And to conclude, the principle of development in this location is acceptable because of the highly sustainable location within the Woodley Town Centre, which is a major development location, where the proposal for new residential dwellings is supported by policy. The design, mass, and scale of the building and the layout of the development is considered appropriate for the proposed use. In the context of a dense town centre location, there is adequate there's adequate residence and neighbor amenity, as well as satisfactory parking provision. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and the completion of a legal agreement to provide affordable housing and employment skills plan. Thank you.
Okay. Bill?
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of Woodley Town Council. And following meetings of the Planning and Community Committee, the decision reached by that committee was that this application should be refused for the following reasons. The 4-storey building, consisting of 16 apartments, will overlook the neighbouring Beechwood Primary School, a situation we feel would not be in the best interests of the school or its pupils. At present, car parking is available for owners and staff of retail units in Library Parade. All but 5 dedicated parking will be removed under this proposal. At present, there's a space for 18 car parking spaces. This is going to be reduced to 10. Now, I don't know whether this is unique, but I certainly think it's unusual that we have 5 retail units that have parking space for 18 vehicles. We're now adding 16 residential properties to that area, and we're reducing the number to 10. It seems a rather backward step to me. An owner, a member of staff, parking for 8 hours. What I'm trying to say is that if we remove these, we have a situation where only having 5 spaces for the retail units would make it possible that the staff would have to then park in the car parking adjacent to this area, which is the Library Car Park Parade in Headley Road. So if that is the situation, a member of staff parking for an 8-hour shift would now be required to pay £4 per day for parking. And should the proposed new car parking charges be implemented, this would then change and rise to £9 per day. Retail staff who are among the lowest paid would find this totally unaffordable, and this in turn would have a further negative effect on local businesses. I think that the car parking is the main problem as far as I see. This area, as I say, has space for 18 vehicles, and that allows for the retail units to have access for staff and for the owners, and you're taking that away. Although dismissed in the supplementary planning agenda, the wind tunnel effect concern is still considered possible. As anyone who visits Woodley Centre will agree, this can feel, well, you can feel this as you walk through the main centre. If you walk through the main centre of Woodley Car Park, the building height is similar to what this will be, and the wind tunnel effect through there is quite considerable. And even at the moment, walking through Library Parade, there is the wind tunnel effect. This can only be increased with the change in design of these buildings. We feel that this proposed development is not in the best interests of Woodley businesses and residents, and would ask the committee to refuse this application. I think retail is having a hard enough time at the moment, and I would consider this is only going to make it worse. Thank you.
Bruce Chappell?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for your time and opportunity to have a say about my opposition against the development of Library Parade. My name's Bruce Chappell. I own and live with my daughter in one of the flats above the Lidl building, which is directly opposite Library Parade. One of the reasons I purchased that property was because of the balcony. It provides us with an open outdoor space, along with a level of privacy and isolation due to the height of the building. We're not overlooked, and we're far enough away from the surrounding buildings for all of us to have our privacy. Having looked at the plans of the development, I was gobsmacked to see the addition of an extra floor. These plans have windows directly opposite both mine and my daughter's bedrooms, totally invading our privacy. Something which concerns me, especially in the current climate of horror stories that we all read about in the press. I believe it's unacceptable that a young woman of 16 years of age will not feel comfortable in her own room, having to close the curtains as the room will be so close to the building has upset her greatly. I've noted the distance between the two dwellings is within planning guidelines, which states that a distance of 10 metres or so is adequate. However, in reality and in my opinion, it is not. I would have been more than happy for a member of the Wokingham Planning Department to have visited my property to see firsthand, with their own eyes, the impact of this development. Unfortunately, this has not happened, and it seems that a drawing was adequate enough to make this decision. In my opinion, the development is not in keeping with the distances between the current dwellings, which maintain all of the residents' privacy, as stated earlier in my argument. I do not want to see what people are having for dinner, and they do not want to see me getting ready for work in the morning. Yes, we have some curtains, but you get the point. With an impending building imposing itself over my property, affecting my outdoor space and my privacy, there's a potential detrimental effect on its value. And if not its value, then its appeal to potential buyers should I wish to sell it in the future. I'm sure all of us in this room are heavily invested in our properties and are all protective of future returns. The extra floor will also cut out natural light and add noise pollution with the addition of more residents. I'm a shift worker, and the appeal of the flat was its location. It's quiet, it's private, it allows me to sleep and rest when I need to for work. This will be compromised, and if the building gets the go-ahead, it will affect me for the duration of my time in my flat. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not opposed to the development and the creation of affordable housing in our area. However, I think these plans are an overdevelopment, which is trying to shoehorn too much into a small building. I also believe that the notion of cheap, affordable housing is false, as let's be honest, there's no such thing in Woodley and the surrounding areas. I'd like to echo everything this gentleman said before me. I agree with all the arguments, but I've only got 3 minutes, so I thought I'd make it about me. So thank you.
Paul
Butt, the agent.
Paul Butt, the agent, and there's a
Adriana for the PowerPoint.
and there's a PowerPoint, Adriana.
Yes, I'll share my screen.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you, Chair. I'm the planning agent for the application. I've visited Woodley Centre a number of times and been impressed by its wide range of facilities and its vibrancy. Walking around the centre, the height of the proposal does not appear to me to be out of place. These first and second slides you see give before and after impression of the proposal, which I hope helps. The existing building is looking somewhat dated, and the rear of the building and its open car park is quite unappealing. Nevertheless, investment has recently been made in the 3 existing retail units, which are all to be retained and which will hopefully also thrive. The height of the proposed building is comparable to that of the Lidl building opposite, with 3 stories of flats that are proposed. If we have the next slide. Comparable height is achieved because Lidl's and the house centre above it are both commercial stories in height. This is why we've been able to achieve 16 1- and 2-bedroom flats. If I have the 4th slide, please. There are 2 flats set back on top of the Lidl building, and the internal relationship with those across Library Parade has been carefully considered. I'm thankful to the planning officer who gave helpful, positive advice on this matter following a site meeting, including an internal viewing, and resulted in the amended plans you see before you. There are many positive benefits that would flow from a planning permission for the proposal, including the 16 flats on a brownfield site in a town centre location, of which 5 would be much needed affordable housing provided on site. 2 of which, or 2 of the flats would also be wheelchair accessible and each have a disabled car parking space between them. All of the 10 car parking spaces would have facilities for electric vehicle charging. The 5 car parking spaces that are proposed for the retail units are as a result of the lease that they have with my client. And each of them has 2, apart from the smaller one on the end, which has 1 car parking space. So part of the leasing. Our energy consultant has advised that the flats could achieve CO2 savings of approximately 65% over the building regs, which would exceed the council's policy requirements. Local needs and sustainability are important planning considerations, and I would recommend your proposal to you in this town centre location. Thank you.
And last but not least, Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. I'm not always in favour of office space being repurposed as living space, but in this case, it is more or less a complete rebuild rather than a conversion, which possibly is a good thing. However, it is vital that the dwellings provide accommodation with generous living space, especially where private amenity space is in short supply. And amenity space is in short supply in this application, where only 9 of the 16 apartments has a balcony. This does not accord with R16 of the Borough Design Guide. The quality of life for future residents would be improved considerably if there were fewer apartments with more generous proportions and balconies for all. I'm confused by the report, which states in paragraph 38, the revised ground floor plan shows 2 accessible units because there are no ground floor apartments. The accessible units, numbers 2 and 3, are on the 1st and 2nd floors respectively, which is fine because there is a lift. Unfortunately, the lift is at the opposite side of the building to the accessible apartments, meaning that a wheelchair user will have to propel themselves almost the full length of the building along a walkway, which is largely exposed to the elements, to get from the lift to their front door. This is poor design. It almost looks as though including accessible units were an afterthought, perhaps to tick an appropriate box or 2. I also question why wheelchair accessible apartments appear to have bathrooms shown on the plans rather than level access wet rooms. I hope this is a simple mistake because otherwise it will cost the council money when we have to put in a level access shower room for these people because they can't use the bath. Parking provision is woefully inadequate. 16 flats and only 5 residents' parking spaces, and 2 of those are quite rightly allocated to the accessible dwellings. The remaining 11 flats will have no parking whatsoever. They will be car-free, we are told. But they won't be, will they? The owners will still have cars. They will simply park them in nearby streets, causing inconvenience to other residents, which is what happens with people who live in the flats on the top of Lidl, largely. The existing informal car park is used extensively by staff, as Bill has mentioned, and they work in the retail units. These people will also start parking in nearby streets or in the service areas of the other retailers. Another concern is delivery vehicles delivering supplies to these retail units, the ones in Library Parade. Where will they park to unload? Large vehicles simply won't be able to enter the parking area because of the angle of the gate, and they will likely park elsewhere, causing an obstruction. We already see the highly dangerous practice of HGVs reversing the entire length of the service road alongside Lidl, when other vehicles are preventing them from turning round. My final concern is in connection with the extraction, heating and cooling units, which are currently sited on the rear of the building. These are vital for the businesses in Library Parade. Why are there no drawings showing where these are going to be relocated when the development is complete? In conclusion, I would ask the committee to consider at least deferring this application until the aforementioned issues are properly addressed. Thank you.
Any members wishing to speak? Okay, Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask questions around 2 matters. Firstly, the issue of housing affordability. Now, it's stated that there would be a 40% requirement for the provision of affordable housing, and that there are 16 units being proposed in total. My calculations, I think, suggest that 40% of 16 is 6.4 units, not the 5 units that have been designated or identified as affordable. So my first question around the issue of affordability, is that besides the on-site provision of affordable housing, will there be a sum provided in lieu for the remainder of the affordable housing requirement. I also note that 5 out of the 16 proposed homes, are 2 bedrooms, and yet the affordable housing that's being proposed all relates to 1 bedroom homes. It would seem to me that the affordable housing that is provided on site should reflect the proportion of 1 and 2 bedroom homes in the in the development as a whole. In other words, that at least 1 of the affordable homes should be 2 rather than 1 bedroom. So I'd like an officer comment on that as well, please. The second line of questioning is, I think, not unexpectedly, because I'm sure many other people will also have concerns about this. It is the quite complex in this situation, matter of parking, I believe. And of course, there are 2 types of users in this area that will require parking. There are the users of the retail units. I note that it's currently, the documentation currently describes 3 retail units, and that is indeed what the plans show. And yet it is possible, from the drawings that have been provided, that one of those units may have been subdivided and could at some point in the future, be returned, to use in its own right. Now, my questions about the parking for the retail units, I guess, are what would the borough's parking standards require of the 3 currently 3 retail units? And given what I was saying, about the size of at least one of them, appearing possibly to have been subdivided in the past, is the size of the retail unit also, a material consideration? There is also, of course, the demand for parking of residents, and I listened very carefully to what Councillor Boyd said, about the current parking arrangements, where it was suggested, that some residents in nearby flats without allocated parking are having to park in nearby streets, with everything that entails. So I'm very concerned about that. And I appreciate that this is a very sustainable site. I appreciate it is very much within a retail area. However, the reality is, that there will be residents, should this go ahead, who will have cars. And I guess my question is, under what circumstances would the normal parking standards apply, and when would there be a sound case, for them to be exempted? Thank you.
Stephen?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You. Could I answer the questions that Andrew's raised?
Yes, please. Thank you, Adriana.
That's okay. I'll do my best. I believe the first question was regarding housing affordability and why there were only 5 units proposed. In answer to that, this was the advice and the recommendation we received from the Council's affordable housing team. They were the ones who made the calculations and suggested that for the amount of units proposed, 5 units, 5 of those units should be for affordable housing. And the 5 should be 1 bed. So that was their advice, and that's what we've followed, and that's what we've agreed in principle with the applicant. And obviously, the details of the affordable housing contribution will be assessed and secured in more detail within the legal agreement, the Section 106 legal agreement. But at the moment, that's advice that we've received from our internal consultee affordable housing team. With regards to the parking requirements for the site, maybe Cameron can expand on this, but my understanding is that at the moment there are about 18 parking spaces, but this car park is used informally by not only the retail units, but visitors or users of the retail units, but also the public in general. The council parking standards, I think I've mentioned that in my report in paragraph 58, considering that these are ground retail units and there are also offices on the first floor, these in combination would generate a requirement of approximately 45 parking spaces. So with 18 spaces, there's already a departure of at least 27 spaces at the moment. So there's already a shortfall of parking spaces for the existing uses within the building. Having car-free units in this location, it's not uncommon and it's not unreasonable, given this is a very highly sustainable location within a town centre. I would like to point out as well that the Lidl building, the flats above the Lidl building opposite, which are 13 flats, they were all granted planning permission and they're all car-free. So again, this is not an unreasonable outcome in the town centre location. And again, this was advised and encouraged by our highways officer as well. So yeah. I don't know if Cameron wants to expand on the highway issue.
Thank you, Adriana. Actually, in terms of parking, as you correctly have said, that the 11 units are car-free development. So actually, we have advised the condition for parking management plan. So I think, in my view, through parking management plan, we can include something in the tenancy agreement that this unit should be car-free development. So that in this way, you can control parking for these units. And the precedent has already been set for the Little development, which is a car-free development, 13 apartments, and even for the Wokingham Town Centre, Peach Street development, where we have considered development on similar proposal. So 5 units for the retail and then 5 for the housing, for the 5 units which are 1-bedroom house, So I think 1 parking per unit will be sufficient. That's what according to our standard. So, and there are for the visitors, they are a public car park, so they can park in the visitor car park. So according to our transport policy, we do not encourage vehicles to the town centre. So that's against the transport policy. So this is highly sustainable location. So in that location, low car development can be acceptable, subject to the parking management conditions.
Stephen?
Thank you. Can I just comment a little further on the affordable housing element and then come on to another matter? I, like Andrew, thought that doesn't look like 40%. It looks as though it should be 6, not 5. But I think we need to recognise that the housing team will have taken into account, I think, in that calculation of 5 rather than 6, that 2 of those are adapted for disabled use. And there's a particular need for that. So I think that will have outweighed going up to the 40%. And clearly that does involve quite a lot of adaptation and important. So the contribution really is, in a sense, in the quality as well as the quantity. Fact that they're all 1-bedroom as opposed to the 2-bedroom that you might have preferred, Andrew, I think, again, there's a kind of logic to that. The way in which the housing team make this assessment is against identified housing need. There is a particular need for 2-bedroom houses with gardens, but there's a rather less obvious need for 2-bedroom flats. So I think the judgment will have been made that single person occupancy or 2 people occupancy in single bedroom flats is probably the best use. I mean, it is a town centre location. I do think we need to keep that in mind. This is very sustainable in terms of access to local facilities, shops, obviously, and other local facilities. So, you know, that weighs in favour of this application. We discussed at great length in the previous application. One of the material considerations in its favour was the provision of affordable housing. That is equally true here, and we should remember that. The other issue I wanted to raise was really to pick up on Mr. Chappell's point about the relationship between the proposed new flats and his own property and the other properties in the flats above Liddell. And that is something that is of concern to me. And I, at the risk of going down to a second defeat of the evening, I was wondering whether it would be appropriate for us actually to look at this in situ to get a better sense of what the relationship might be. It's not easy when it's not yet built, but I think it would be useful to be able to see.
Are you making a proposal or something?
I am. I think I am. I am making a proposal for a site visit so we can assess the impact of the proposed development on neighbouring properties.
David?
I would be happy to second that.
Yeah. Okay. Seconder. We haven't had a vote yet. Yes, that's the problem. We also have to think about deferred applications. Those in favour of deferral for a site visit? Any against or abstentions? Okay. The next one is application 86, 223-565 14 Park Road, Woking.
The officer is very heavily pregnant. She won't be here now for that item. To be honest, before we get out of the office, so do that next time. I was going to say it's too late now, but I was going to say, if we can help to answer any privacy concerns, we should.
Say that again.
I said officers possibly could have assisted with us in answering some concerns over print.
Okay, if there. Next application will be 86, 14 Park Road.
Case officer, can you?
Yeah, case officers has to. We're skipping.
My apologies. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Adriana.
Thank you. So the next item is planning application 223565 for the proposed single-story rear extension on Par first floor front extension, conversion of the garage to habitable accommodation, additional fenestration and a cycle storage at number 14 Park Road in Wokingham. I would like to remind the members that this application is a householder application. It's only coming to committee as the the applicant is related to a member of the Development Management Service. This is the location plan and the aerial photograph. The property is a short distance from the council offices, as you can see, and it comprises a two-story detached dwelling with front drive and rear garden. These are the existing plans and elevations, and these are the proposed floor plans. The single-story rear extension would be set in from both side boundaries, and the first floor front extension would not project forward of the existing building line. These are the proposed elevations, and these are existing views of the side from the front and the rear. And to conclude, the scale and design of extensions would respect the character and appearance of the area and would not result in any harmful impact upon neighboring amenities, and adequate parking space is provided on site. Therefore, we are recommending approval of the application. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen.
Thank you. It's worth reminding ourselves that the only reason this is before the committee, or categories of application like this come before the committee, is because it's important that there is the appearance of complete transparency when it comes to granting of planning permissions, especially if they concern an officer of the council or a relative of an officer of council. So we have to accept that normally an application of this kind would be dealt with as a delegated item. I don't see any problem with the application, and perhaps more relevantly, nor does the town council, nor do local councillors, and nor do neighbours. So I propose that we accept the officer recommendation and approve this application.
Okay, those in favour? Unanimous. Addington School and then Buckhurst Court. Derek?
Just bringing up my presentation. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. This is application 223348 at Addington School along Woodlands Avenue to the west of Woodley Town Centre. The proposal relates to a single-storey modular building to be used for a period of up to 3 years and includes minor alterations to landscaping. The application site is located within the grounds of Addington School and comprises of a small area of existing playground to the east of the existing main school building as shown in the site plan above. The proposal relates to a temporary single-storey flat roof modular building, which includes a science classroom, store and office room in order to support 10 new pupils and 6 new staff members. The proposed modular building would appear suitable for its intended use and compatible in scale and appearance to its surroundings. Moreover, the proposal would largely be screened from the public realm as shown in the photograph on the right, and would have a minimal visual impact on the character and appearance of the street scene. The proposal would be adjacent to a small strip containing several silver birch trees. One of these trees, outlined in red in the plan above, cannot be retained with the proposed layout, therefore will need to be removed. The Council's Trees and Landscape Officer has raised no objections to the removal of this tree, however has requested that a replacement silver birch tree is planted within the curtilage of the application site during the next planting season. This has been secured via a planning condition. Overall, the proposal is considered to accord with relevant policies contained within the NPPF, WBC's adopted core strategy and the Borough Design Guide. As such, it is being recommended for conditional approval. Thank you.
Stephen?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Tarek. This application should be approved. This is going to increase SEND provision. We desperately need SEND provision in the borough. This will allow the school to effectively take in 10 new pupils. I propose that we accept the officer recommendation and grant planning permission.
I will second it. Well, we have a whole bunch of people seconding it, so fine. Those in favor of the approval? That's unanimous. The last application is 223023 Buckhurst Court, London Road. Tarek? And Tarek is presenting.
Thank you. This is application 223023 at Buckhurst Court along London Road in Wokingham, and is a full application for the proposed change of use from an office to private SEND school, including the installation of a playground, play equipment, and erection of additional fencing. The application site is located to the northeast of the A329. To the southwest is St Anne's Manor Hilton Hotel and Conference Centre. The site is classified as outside of the settlement boundary. The application seeks a change of use from an office to a private SEND school. The school would have up to 50 pupils between the ages of 7 to 18 years old and a total of 32 staff members. No external alterations or extensions to the existing building are proposed within this application. The only external works are to form a playground and play equipment, along with the erection of fencing within the curtilage of the application site. The application site is located near a motorway, the A329, and is within an area of potentially contaminated land. The council's environmental health officer has recognised that this is a sensitive area and has recommended suitable pre-commencement conditions which are attached to the scheme prior to any development taking place. This includes a noise impact assessment, an air quality assessment, and an investigation and risk assessment to assess the nature and extent of any land contamination at the site. The application site is accessed via a 250-metre long access road, which is bordered by a row of tall, mature trees. The access road currently has no pavement for pedestrians. As such, the agent has submitted a site access and traffic management statement, which details how pedestrians would safely access the site, which would be achieved for pupils, staff members, and visitors during the operation of the school. The operation of this plan has been secured via a planning condition. Overall, the proposal is considered to accord with relevant policies contained within the MPPF, core strategy, and borough design guide. As such, it should be recommended for conditional approval. I also wish to inform members that an additional condition will be attached, which requires a remediation scheme in the event that contamination is found at any time during the development. This will read as condition 6 on page 571. Thank you.
Sharu, Kashyap.
Madam Chair, I am here to speak in support of the application. I'd like to thank the planning officer for visiting the site and then providing a comprehensive report which recommends the application to be approved. The conditions and a Section 106 agreement that are being recommended as part of the report have been noted, and we have instructed our lawyers to work with the council's legal team to agree these on approval being obtained. The reason to set up a school like Odyssey, which provides a small, unique learning environment for children who have had poor education experiences in mainstream settings. I have provided some visuals of the proposed interior plans, and we are committed in providing a high-quality education provision for our students. We believe that every child deserves the best start in life, and we are committed to making a significant financial investment in creating a warm, nurturing, unique, and high-quality learning environment, as you will note from those visuals. There is a huge local need, and even before we can open our doors, we have already received over 50 consultations for placements for the school. We already have a waiting list for September, and this is not just a private school for children. This is an independent school for children who have absolutely no other education options or are in provisions where their needs are not being met. At least 30% of the children who are currently referred to us are out or are off compulsory school age and are currently out of education. We are here to meet a very high local demand, and we're working very closely with the SEND commissioning teams of the borough as well. And whilst there have been no objections from the statutory consultees for this application, we have had an objection from Councillor Gee. And I do understand why she makes some of her points. The details of the points that we put in the planning application, our focus was obviously on the planning law and the change of use. Some of the points that the councillor raises are around the registration and operations of the school. The school will obviously have a registration visit by Ofsted prior to opening and will only gain registration once they are satisfied that we comply with the requirements of opening and running a school safely. And these are some of the main areas that cover the councillor's objections. I would also welcome an opportunity to meet with the councillor on site and allay any of the points that she wishes us to consider. I really thank you for the opportunity, and I respectfully urge members of this committee to approve the much needed local provision. Thank you.
Maria? Maria G? Would you like to speak?
Hello, yes, I would. Thank you very much, Councillor Shepherd-Debay. I'd just like to start by saying there has been a statutory consultee objection, which is the Wokingham Town Council objection, which says that they have some concerns regarding any pedestrian access to the sites. This route would be unsafe and be unhealthy with car pollution for those walking to and from the site. So, in response to my comments, the applicant said the application was validated by the council in accordance with their validation requirements. I question whether the application should have been validated, and I asked the committee to reject this application. It doesn't help that the application doesn't show any dimensions. It's very difficult to see how children are going to be adequately catered for. In the planning application, the site area is given as 1,052 square metres. This is only the building, not the site. And I wonder whether the applicants had considered that if the site was more than 1 hectare, it would require a flood risk assessment. As it turned out, it was less than a hectare, so that was fine, but it wasn't in the original application. The site is on a list of 840 potentially contaminated sites in Wokingham Borough. The report dated 2015, and therefore it should have been accompanied by a land contamination assessment. That being said, the statement on the planning application that there are no users who are particularly vulnerable to assessment to contamination is incorrect. The applicants also say there's no trees and hedges on site, and there's a lot of confusion about how staff and parents and teachers will be able to get to school. Initially, the application talks about children walking or cycling or using the local public transport system. However, in the site access statement, it says we review the distance of the home locations of the students, and only 1 student lives within a walkable distance of the school. And in the response to my comments, the planning consultant also states that no students will be walking or cycling along this road. So I question sustainability overall. The proximity to local services and facilities will ensure that the proposal enhances and contributes to maintain the vitality of the local community and economy. Well, there just aren't any local facilities, so I question whether that's accurate as well. I'm particularly unimpressed by the transport management proposals, which appear to rely on ad hoc and temporary measures to control vehicle and pedestrian access to the site. And as you'll see from my comments, I just don't think it's safe for the children to enter the site. I'd like to point out that this part of London Road is not a private road, it's adopted highway, and I have found no evidence that Wokingham Borough Council is in discussions with the education providers. Just on the basis of the planning application alone and the fact that it's inaccurate and doesn't have a land contamination.
Would you please sum up, Maria, can you please
Yes,
sum up?
just on the basis of the planning application and all the errors within it, I don't think that this application should ever have been validated, and I think it should be rejected until we at least get a site contamination report on it, given the vulnerable users. Thank you.
Now,
That's I think we need to vote.
okay, now we need to vote on, before we do anything else, we need to vote for an extension because we're at that time, that budget time. All those in.
Second.
I'll propose an extension.
Yeah, and second, and all those in favor? Thank you, it's passed. Okay, I will say that we definitely need send school places in Woking, that we are short of them, and we have a fair number of students here that really need it. Hopefully you're going to be accepting some Woking students in this place as well. Other than that, I will go on to let somebody else speak. Rebecca, and then David and Steve.
I'll be brief. Just a question about the outside area. So, and also about the monitoring of the air quality. It's hard to see from the plans where the outside areas would be for the children that are on site. So what happens, there's just a clarity, it's just a question to you, Tarek. What happens if it comes back that the survey, the air quality assessment is poor, there is contamination? What actually does happen if there aren't outdoor areas for the children to use on the site?
Thank you. So in the event that the air quality assessment comes back and the air quality isn't suitable, essentially the development can't commence until the applicant's able to provide a mitigation strategy. The same for contamination as well. The latest condition that I added, the remediation scheme, has been attached so that if any contamination is found during the construction at the site, all development must stop, and the remediation scheme would need to be submitted and approved by the council to ensure that the contamination could be dealt with in an adequate way. Again, if this can't be done feasibly by the applicant, then development cannot commence at the site.
Follow-up question? David and Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't my area of expertise. I'm interested in this. Clearly, there is a need for more SEND places in the borough. I think we will agree with that. And I'd very much like to be able to support this. But Councillor G has raised a lot of what seem to be perfectly reasonable inquiries and questions about it. I'm not entirely clear which of her queries are be dismissed as incorrect, which of them are covered off in the conditions, or which of them will be covered by the registration of the school. And without that kind of clarification, it's quite difficult to come to a judgment on whether her points are reasonable or answered, or where we are on that. I find that quite confusing.
Tarek, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I do wish to clarify that the Council's Special Educational Needs Officer has reviewed this application and has raised no objections. Of course, the applicant will need to comply with statutory legislation, guidance, code of practice, and Ofsted requirements prior to the building being occupied by any students. So that has been taken into account. A number of other comments that are raised by Councillor Maria Glee would be tackled by building regulations. For instance, I believe Councillor mentioned that the building wouldn't have adequate ventilation and sunlight for pupils, but many of these aspects are covered under building control outside of planning. Thank you.
Anything else, David?
Yeah, I'm not entirely certain I'd follow that. So are you saying there is no point that Councillor G has raised that is not covered either by the conditions, building regulations, or the SEND school registration process?
Yes, I believe the comments and concerns that were raised by Councillor Maria have been covered by the conditions that have been put in place, or will be covered once the school, if planning application is approved, will be covered under separate statutory legislation in relation to the SEND schools and Ofsted requirements. But in planning terms, this complies with policy and is acceptable, subject to the recommended conditions and the Section 106 agreement.
Stephen?
Thank you. I feel well disposed to this application because it is going to increase SEND provision. It's necessary because there is unfortunately currently an under provision in terms of our own non-private, non-independent places available for SEND pupils. So this is fulfilling a need, and it is something that I think in principle we should support. I'm very mindful that Maria has come up with a great raft of concerns. As far as I can see, Tarek has addressed most of those through planning conditions, and those that remain seem to relate principally to building control matters or licensing matters, which fall outside our control as a planning committee. So judging this purely on the planning case, it clearly is providing a very important need, and the pupils that go there will clearly benefit enormously from this opportunity. And given that Tarek has reassured us that the legitimate planning concerns that Maria raised can be addressed through conditions, I propose that we approve this application.
I'd second that.
Vote, everybody in favor? Against? Abstain? All right, thank you. She's gone through a 580-page agenda. Oh my goodness.